This is iFanboy 2024 All Media Year-End Roundup, brought to you by ibuprofen and iFanboy listeners just like you. Hello, welcome to iFanboy 2024 All Media Year-End Roundup. My name is Conor Kilpatrick, and I am here with Josh Flanagan.
Hello, friends. And you
Ron
guys.
Richards. I don't know when you're going to end.
You'd think after nearly 20 years you guys would be able to do this. Hello, Connor. How are you?
Hi, Ron.
As soon as Ron shows up, the timing's off.
We are iFanboy, and we like comic books, but we also like lots of other things. We've been doing this end-of-the-year show since we began. The first year, 2006, was the next year, but we started that January. We did one of these. This is the show where we'll talk about movies and television shows and music and podcasts and books and comics and all the things we liked in 2024.
It's safe to say this is the highlight of our year.
We're all very excited for it.
I've been looking forward to this for weeks.
By the end of the recording, we're less excited for it.
If you are listening to this and you can find a way to help me stop, please reach out. I don't know if I'm here under my own free will anymore. I can't tell. What's the podcast equivalent of Stockholm Syndrome?
You wake up, you brush your teeth, you go to the store, you get milk, you do a podcast. It's just like you got to. It's like taking the trash out now, right?
He gets up. There's a Slack from one of us saying when and where to be, and he just shows up.
That's that's not that far off.
Here's to you, my friend. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers for 20 years. So this is a quick reminder. There may be spoilers. We don't really tend to spoil things on this particular show, but if you're really worried about something, there's show notes to employ to make sure you don't listen to something you don't want to. But we don't really go into the plots here. We'll just get going. We'll start off, as always, with a movie segment. And we always like to remind people that even though you're listening to the show in mid to late December, we're recording at the start of December. So there are some December films. We won't have the Brutalist on here, things like that. If you don't hear your favorite film, it's because we probably didn't see it or hasn't come out yet.
Haven't seen it yet.
Or don't like it.
True.
Yeah. We might not like your favorite film.
Yep.
It's also, we discussed this before the show. It was an odd year, not a bad year of film, but an odd year. There wasn't a big consensus film. There wasn't like last year with Oppenheimer and Barbie. It was very easy to put your finger on the pulse of the zeitgeist of the film going public, but this year it was all over the map.
I've been saying it's a nuanced year. There were some gems in there, but nothing like really caught up until, a couple of times. Obviously Deadpool and Wolverine and Wicked.
Oh, I forgot about that.
You know.
Well, I was going to say is that
too.
Wicked, my family are trying to get tickets to see it. I'm in New Hampshire. They can't find any tickets that have enough seats next to them, like second weekend out.
I will say I went Saturday after Thanksgiving. I took my kids to see Moana 2, and I have not. And I'm in the suburbs of Long Island. I have not been in a movie theater that felt like it was the 90s in a very long time. There was a line for the concessions, right? It was packed. The lobby was packed when we went into the movie. When we came out of the movie, couldn't find parking. It really felt like another time. So I guess that's good, right?
For movie theaters.
Yeah.
What's funny is that so they bought tickets finally. They found one at 11:30 in the morning, and I just got an email that said the theater had a maintenance problem and they have to shut down tomorrow, and they refunded our tickets. Oh, and I was like, that's a rough day to lose your theater. Like the one day everyone went. Let's move on with the show.
Let's move on. So we'll start off with, I think at this point, my favorite movie of the year is Anora. The smallest release from Sean Baker, writer director Sean Baker's done several lower budget films, usually involving the sex worker industry in some way. This one won Cannes, and I knew nothing about it walking in. I just knew it was, people were talking about it. Friends of mine who'd seen it were talking about it. I heard about it, heard it won Cannes, so I went and was not expecting the movie I got, but also not expecting it to be so much fun and also not life-affirming exactly, but sort of like, this is why I go to the movies, to stumble on a movie like this that I didn't know anything about, and it was such a great experience.
I had the exact same experience going into. I knew a little bit about it. I think I'd watched the trailer, and I knew that it was about a sex worker and a Russian oligarch child, but beyond that, that was that. And I walked out of this movie feeling so refreshed about filmmaking again, and the idea. Ultimately, this is it's funny because I've seen it described as a comedy, which I'm like, oh, there was funny parts. And I've seen it described as like a modern day Cinderella story, which I get that too, but it almost defies definition or convention. And Connor, I know you're going to agree with me here. There was a surprising, I'm not going to say twist, but a surprising direction and emergence about halfway through the film.
Yeah.
That just like, as I'm watching the movie, I noticed it early.
Yeah.
Then like I watched it like almost, unfold, slowly through the movie to become like the thing I was rooting for. Like it was a weird sleight of hand that happened in this movie, but it was a blast.
I mean, I think it's kind of a rom-com in a way.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, I can see that. Yeah.
It starts off as one thing, and you think you're following this particular story, and it takes a hard left or right turn, whichever way you want to go, in the middle, and it changes totally, and it becomes this interesting thing. There was a whole period of this movie where I wouldn't let myself feel like things are okay.
Or I don't know how this is going to end.
Right. But then once I realized the story is actually what this is happening in the second half, I went, oh, shit.
Yep.
And I thought it was very funny. I thought the cast was incredible.
It basically, in a nutshell, it goes from modern Cinderella story, a lot of comparisons to Pretty Woman, that sort of thing. And then it turns into Crazy Night in New York City vibe, like as they're driving around in the city, which there's almost multiple movies within the one movie, which I think makes it so complex and so wonderful.
It has kind of an Uncut Gems vibe for a while, where it's very manic and very tense, and then it becomes a different thing.
Josh, not as tense as Uncut Gems.
No.
There's nothing.
Which, by the way, I asked my wife, I'm like, do you want to watch Uncut Gems? And she's like, I never want to see that movie.
I agree.
I love that movie so much.
Mikey Madison, who plays the title character, Anora, is incredible.
So good. She was on Better Things. Remember I talked on this show about Better Things years ago? Yeah, she's fantastic.
One time in Hollywood, she was one of the Manson girls at the end. Really, really great, compelling. The whole cast. It's not a huge cast. It's a very kind of focused, small cast. And I thought all of the Russian and Albanian guys were more interesting than you thought they'd be in the beginning.
Yep.
The way the second half built in tension and comedy was, I thought, really, really impressive.
Really, really good.
So far, my favorite film of the year.
And it's in the Oscar race. I mean, it potentially could be Best Picture. So, like, it's definitely up there.
Yeah, for sure.
Very good. Well, yeah, so I agree with you. Anora was probably my favorite movie of the year. It's the number one on my top of list. But what was number one on my list for the majority of the year, which now probably falls to number two, was Hitman, Glenn Powell in the Richard Linklater written and directed movie. Actually, I think Glenn Powell and Richard Linklater co-wrote it.
They did. When I was writing the script, I accidentally wrote Hot Man, and I went, well, that works too.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Much like Anora, walking out of the theater after seeing Hitman made me feel love for movies again.
Isn't it great? It's the best feeling.
And the thing is, it's not like I'm disillusioned or like don't love movies.
They still make these movies.
Exactly. Every now and then, it is nice to be reminded of what is so great about a theater going experience, where there are twists and turns. And again, I'm continue to be a huge advocate, and this will come up a little later, for seeing movies in the theater, because having your direct attention and no distraction. And like, there's something about being in the dark room, and there's something about just like the big screen and all that sort of stuff. And Hitman, which tells the story of an unassuming professor who gets caught up pretending to be a hitman for the police to help undercover operations, much similar in a zigzaggy rom-com kind of way.
Yep.
And went in directions I didn't expect or didn't anticipate, and was just like a blast in the theater, a blast to see, and just like was like, yes, this is why I love movies. This is fantastic.
It was also one of the sexiest movies of the year.
It really was. I mean, the chemistry between Glenn Powell and the female lead, I forget her name.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like it was too hot, too sexy. But yeah, Hitman was great. It's streaming on Netflix. So like, if you haven't seen it as of yet, I strongly recommend it, because I do think it's one of the best movies of the year. And it's just so delightful. I wish I had a longer theatrical run, because it could have been like a summer rom-com hit, but only got 2 weeks.
Yeah. Because it had such a limited run, I saw it in a completely sold out theater, and it was amazing.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it was great.
I remember I took a day off, just like a random day off. And I was like, I'll go see a movie by myself. And I went and saw The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. I give Conor credit. He said, you should go see that. You will like it. I am a very big Guy Ritchie fan. I always have been. It's funny because now I'm like, oh, he's not the young hip guy anymore. Kids probably hate him now. That kind of thing. But if you want to talk about like a movie that is kind of made for me, it's a British World War II movie that's kind of quirky and is kind of a heist film, and there's all sorts of those interesting Guy Ritchie characters.
And based on a true story.
Oh, and it's a true story. Like you said that, and it stuck in my head a little bit. I was like, this can't be. But, the way that all that frenetic energy and all those different people, and, there's a bunch of great character actors in there, produced by Jerry Bruckheimer for some reason. This is one of those ones like, what a great movie that they don't make like this. And I can't imagine who would go see it. But, constant action. And Guy Ritchie at one point, was sort of known for like super fast, and, it was just 1,000 things. But this was
Snatch.
Yes, that is a movie.
No, but like that kind of
Lock,
like the
Stock, Snatch,
fast talking gangster movie kind of. Yeah, exactly.
And this was, it was, compared to other movies, it was quite energetic, but it was a little more subdued than like that kind of movie, an older, more mature filmmaker. It's just really fun. Like it's sort of the closest thing I've seen since Inglourious Bastards. It was a little like that irreverent kind of tone.
It's definitely irreverent.
Yes.
It's still exciting and fun and funny and compelling too. I mean, I thought Henry Cavill was so good in
Well,
it.
and that was one of the other things.
That's something you don't hear often.
No,
Well,
Henry
he's very
Cavill's
good in
great.
it. Yeah,
He's
good at Mission Impossible too.
He was in Superman, but like
He was
even
good
like
in Superman. The movies were bad, but he was good.
He's an aborted movie star. It didn't happen for him.
yeah, but sometimes that means that they go and those people make better movies.
Yeah.
You know, like Billy Bob Thornton, kind of started to be a big movie star. It doesn't really work. And all of a sudden you have this like career of really interesting work. It's not the same as Henry Cavill, but I think that's the deal. Like he's good. He's a great lead in this kind of movie. And if that means that it has to be sort of a, not A+ blockbuster movie, then great. That's fine for me. Great cast, though. Henry Golding, Carrie Elwes, Isaac Gonzalez. It was like when I was watching it, I was like, I kind of recognize most of these people.
Yeah, they're all faces you recognize.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that because they were, they're just good actors. In fact, there was the one guy, the main Nazi in this one, he was Stieglitz from Inglourious Bastards, which is a little bit of a crossover. I mean, he's not the same character, but I was like, why do I know that guy? And I was like, oh, he's in the movie that's the most like this movie.
Yeah.
Really great set pieces, great locations, all that stuff you want. It was a good time. I'm glad I took that day off and went to see it. And that Conor told me. And if something went wrong, I almost didn't get to go. And I was like, no, I'm going to this movie. And I did.
All right.
I think maybe Lindsay was out of town and like the kid, maybe she took the kids with them or somewhere. I don't know. But I had no responsibilities that one day. What a day. This movie could have been anything. I'd have been like, that was amazing.
I had a lot of fun in the movies this year. I saw a lot of fun movies. And one of the more fun experiences I had in movies was seeing Kneecap, the Irish film, the fictionalized origin story of the real-life rap group Kneecap.
Fassbender, right?
Fassbender plays one of their dads and an IRA bomber who is living on the run. It's all fictionalized, but
that's awesome.
The actual rappers play themselves, and they're actually pretty good. They're actually really funny guys, and they can perform. It's not surprising when musicians can act. Being on stage is kind of a performance in and of itself. But it was a window into a culture I didn't know a lot about. I mean, it's not Irish culture, but it's the Irish nationalist language movement in Northern Ireland, where they were fighting to make Irish a recognized official language in Northern Ireland. These guys rap in Irish. And so they've become these sort of nationalist figures there. And so there's a lot of actually interesting political, cultural stuff going on, but in the midst of a really fun, funny movie about these two degenerates and one proto-degenerate becoming rappers. Really funny. The music is terrific. The musical scenes were shot really, really well. It's just really, really interesting and fun. I like a movie where I can have a good time. I can be entertained, but also learn something about the world I didn't know about. And also it was less than 2 hours.
It's an old man thing to say. Also less than 2 hours.
It was less than 2 hours.
Well, hey, I mean, kudos for any movie less than 2 hours, by the way.
I'm not complaining. It's just where we are. It's a sign of the times.
No, but I think it is where we are, but it's also where we are as a culture and generally. It has gotten out of hand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know The Brutalist hasn't opened yet, and none of us have seen it. And I'm not complaining that it's 3.5 hours long because it has an intermission because it's planned for that. But so many movies now are doing the high 2 hours, bordering 3 hours with no intermission. Just like they need editors. They
don't all earn it.
Yeah, exactly. But I'll tell you what earned it. I believe the three of us had joked leading up to the release of Challengers as the sexy tennis movie.
Yep.
And I wasn't going to see it, but then I was just hearing so much momentum and hearing so many comments of it. And I didn't realize that Challengers was directed by Luca Guadagnino, who directed Call Me By Your Name.
Yep.
I was like, all right, so let me go see this. And Challengers was, yes, it was a sexy tennis movie, but it was fantastic.
Really, really good.
I think I've said it on previous podcasts and just in general, huge fan of Mike Feist. I think he's a really, really great actor, and it's great. And I've seen him in a bunch of movies, from West Side Story. He was in the Pinball movie, and now this one. I think he's really, really, really solid. Obviously, Zendaya is an extremely good acting talent.
She's a movie star. Josh
O'Connor was the other male lead, and they created this non-linear storytelling love triangle following these three tennis players from, you meet them in present day when they're in their late 20s, and then it jumps back to when they meet in their teens, and it keeps bouncing between the two kind of timelines, and it progresses the storyline, and it reveals information via that nonlinear storytelling in just a master stroke kind of manner. Yeah. I did not mean the pun there by stroke with tennis. Is stroke tennis? Is that golf? Tennis is stroke, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Stroke. This gets dirty real quick.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. Anyway, yes, it was sexy at times, but it was also very, very cerebral and very, very emotional and very kind of, like the choices you make in relationships and downstream effects of those choices. And then having stuff sneak up on you when you least expect it, all that sort of stuff, all done in the backdrop of a tennis match in Westchester County.
I hope it didn't come out too early because I feel like nobody talks about it anymore amongst the best films of the year. Like I was just listening to a discussion about AFI or somebody put out their top 10 and it wasn't on there and I was really kind of surprised.
It's not even in the conversation. Yeah.
I think it just came out too early in the year. People sort of forgotten about it.
Good point.
Which I think Hitman was also falling into.
Hitman's going to get the Netflix tax.
That's true. But first, second quarter of the year, these movies get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, except for Dune.
True.
Yeah, but Challenger's great. And Luca Guadagnino's latest movie, Queer, is out. I haven't seen it. That's another one of those movies that are coming out at the end of the year that I want to see. Just an amazing filmmaker. So I'm on board for anything this guy does. And Challengers was awesome. I
don't mean to say this now before the next movie, but I was thinking about why I keep thinking that these are sexy movies. Like Anora's sexy in its way. Yeah. Hitman's sexy. Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare is pretty sexy.
Yeah.
Challengers.
We have a lot of sexy here.
Well, that's what I was wondering.
Movies are supposed to be sexy.
So many years of sort of neutered Marvel DC movies where there is no sex.
Yeah.
There is no romance. Yeah. It's that you get back to watching other films like, oh, right. Like these can be sexy. And they are.
Yeah.
I hope The Wild Robot was sexy.
No.
All right. Well, you can't have them all.
I mean, reason I'm talking about it, the thing that affected me is in direct opposition to its sexiness.
Okay, that's fine.
This is a movie that it's got all the things about WALL-E and all the things about the Iron Giant. I don't know what it is about robot animated movies, just for the record. This is a devastating movie about the difficulty of parenting. I was a fucking mess. Like for a long, not a scene, not like you watch, Up, and in the first couple minutes, it's 9 minutes, specifically 9 minutes in and Up, you're a disaster.
Well, yeah, that's just emotional warfare, that first opening scene of Up. Yeah.
But the point is, like, this movie was that for a long time. and it even took it a little step farther for me, is that in a way, the child in this it's a duck, goose. It's a goose. I don't fucking know. Is raised by a robot. Basically, he's orphaned because and he's a little bit of a special needs kid. Like he's got small wings, so it's you can't do this, and I got everything against him. And it was it was a good 45 minutes of me being like, oh boy. Okay, don't look over here, guys. Like, it's going to be okay. But it was also just really honest about, like, I don't know what to do. I don't either. I want to do a good job. They're mad at me. All of the things that go along with being a parent. And, your kids are going to go to it and not see any of that. They're going to see funny animals. But, it's good. Kids movie. It's like calling, like, some of the Pixar movies, they call them kids movies. You're like, well, not really.
They're all ages movies.
Yeah. Yes, and I think it works like that.
People hear all ages, they think kids, but all ages means all of the ages.
Everybody,
From 0 to 99.
Me and my wife took my kids to see the movie. All four of us went. All four of us loved it for different reasons.
Right, exactly.
It worked on multi-levels, so yeah.
Just really, like, if a movie can affect you like that,
yeah,
it's worth something. Lupita Nyong'o in the lead, she's awesome. She can do all sorts of different things. She's great.
The animation style was really nice too. It was really this kind of like rough brush stroke, kind of, and it just captured, because it took place in the wilderness, right? Yeah. So and over multiple seasons, right? So you really got the feeling of summer and spring and winter and all this sort of stuff. And it was very, very good.
Really well designed, really good looking movie. The animals were sort of cool and interesting, and they all had character arcs, and that was really interesting. And big family comes together.
Was it
basically
the best animated film of the year?
It has to be.
Inside Out 2?
Inside Out 2.
I didn't see either one.
Inside Out 2 was pretty good, but it wasn't as good as the first one.
I don't know. I took my kids to see a movie called Hit Pig that had Jason Sudeikis, and it's written by Berkeley Breathe from Opus and all that stuff. And that was a pretty good movie that seemed to have gotten no traction.
I'll tell you an animated movie starring Jason Sudeikis that was way better than you'd think. And I'd say it would even be worth going to see if you hadn't. Angry Birds 2.
Yeah.
Angry Birds is not this year. It was hilarious.
This next film, full disclosure, we know one of the producers, Thelma, was one of those feel-good movies of the year, written and directed by Josh Margolin, starring June Squibb and Richard Roundtree.
That's a fake name.
If there's any justice, Richard Roundtree gets a posthumous Oscar nomination for this movie. It's just a sweet movie. And I saw it again in a packed theater with a lot of people June Squibb's age. It just played really well. It's about a grandmother who is scammed over the phone into giving up money, and she decides she's going to get it back. It's as much about loneliness and needing a community and needing people around you as it is this sort of heist movie.
We saw it in a theater. We were the youngest people in the theater, but I feel like this works on multiple levels. It was very funny. It
was very funny, and also, it's just sweet. Both my grandmothers are still alive. One is 103, one is 98.
Oh, jeez.
It just makes you sad that you can't see them all the time. That you can't spend the time with everyone in your family that they deserve because that's part of the story of she's lonely, and it's just really good. It's just you don't see these kind of movies allowing these kind of actors who are, in their 80s and 90s to get to shine like this, and it was very funny. Very funny.
Yeah, it was good. I'm glad we took the afternoon. We got a babysitter. Me and my wife went to go see it at the Cinema Arts Center, and it was just like glad we saw it. Not only to support our friend who was one of the producers, but also because it was just like it's a really good movie, good cast. Good. Like Parker Posey, Clark Gregg is the parent/kid of the Thelma. Like it was really good.
The guy playing her grandson, Fred Heckinger, was really good too. It was just a really good cast.
Yeah,
and 98 minutes.
Perfect. Look at that. Perfect runtime. Going back to sexy for a moment, I don't know what the runtime is. For an hour and 56 minutes, I just fell in love with the Bikeriders. This is the period piece led by Tom Hardy, along with Austin Butler, about the Midwestern motorcycle gang in the 60s, loosely based on a book of photographs of a real life motorcycle gang, but not like actually adapted. It's just, kind of inspired by.
You mean fiction?
Yes, fiction.
The book is nonfiction. It's a photo book, but the movie is fiction.
Yeah. But at the end, during the credits, they show the photos that the book that inspired this. You can
they
see
take
the
shots right from the book.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. Mike Feist was also in this movie as well. Another Mike Feist movie.
He played the photographer.
Yeah, he's fantastic. But basically Michael Shannon. Oh, I love Michael Shannon, right? But this follows a motorcycle gang, and motorcycle gang makes it sound like criminal or whatever, but it's a club. It's a motorcycle club in the 60s that's led by Tom Hardy out in the Midwest, heavy Chicago Midwest accents. The actress who leads, Jodie Comer, is kind of the narrator, and her Chicago accent was fantastic throughout the whole thing. And it's just basically a hang movie where you just follow along the lives of these guys in this motorcycle gang, and you follow along the drama and their relationships and the fight for leadership and all this sort of stuff.
How the gang changes over the years from a club to a gang.
Right, exactly. Yeah, going the crime route. And then how the influence of the late 60s comes in, and you've got a Easy Rider type person who, as I'm watching the movie, I'm like, he's acting like Norman Reedus, and it was Norman Reedus. Yeah, all in all, it was beautiful to see Tom Hardy doing his best Brando-esque, pained look on his face while riding a motorcycle and dealing with the politics of the club. But yeah, I just got lost in it for 2 hours and actually had a hard time on the walk back to the car, like getting back to reality, because this was just so immersive.
Yeah.
But it was really, really, really good.
Another writer-director film. I wonder how many of those we have on here.
Yeah, Jeff Nichols.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah. If you like Tom Hardy, you got to see it. It's good Tom Hardy.
I really wanted to get to that. I will make sure to see it when it is available.
It is streaming on Peacock, I believe.
I don't have that. So I had to go see Gladiator II. We made sure to go out of our way to see Gladiator II in a theater. I don't know so much about you, Ron, but I know that for Connor and I, Gladiator 1 was a big deal.
And I would have gone if I had not been sick. That was the plan.
Right. I would have gone with you. Our friend Scott Cantor wouldn't stop talking to me about it. He keeps texting me about it. So the question here, was Gladiator 2 a good movie? And the answer is, doesn't matter. I don't know that I can tell you if it was good or not. I think it may not have been good. Did I have a good time there? Would I do it again? Yes. Yes, I would. I think we said the same thing about Ridley Scott, who's apparently ageless. He will never stop. He's going to do 3 gigantic movies a year forever. We talked about Napoleon last year, and is that like at the end you were like, that wrapped up quick. That's my big complaint about Gladiator, I think.
How was Denzel?
He was good. He's very un-Denzel-like in a way. I don't want to give it away if you have do you know anything? Like, he's just not playing to Denzel type.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like, his accent is so clearly a New York accent where he's from, and he doesn't get rid of it, nor do you want him to. He's great. He has so much presence, and he's playing kind of against type, and it's cool to watch him do that thing. I would say that I don't know his name. The guy playing
Paul Mescal?
No. Pascal's great. Oh, Paul Mescal. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know that he had the gravitas of Russell Crowe. I don't know that you could, but he did a lot of things. Like, he stood like him and he walked like him. He was shaped kind of like him. He had that, not stocky, but not, lithe or anything like that. Pedro Pascal's always great. Again, is everybody kind of playing around? Like, it's goofy, it's overwrought, it's melodramatic, but it's like these great scenes. One of my favorite things is that there's a scene where they flood the Colosseum and there's sharks. And I saw a clip of some interviewer going, well, that didn't really happen. And Ridley Scott was like, yes, it did. And I was like, no, it definitely didn't, Ridley. They definitely did not flood it and put giant man-eating sharks in the Coliseum.
Are you sure?
They absolutely did. They used to have naval battles in the Coliseum.
We cannot keep sharks alive in captivity today. How?
You're just talking about sharks.
Oh, sharks.
Not the boat.
Sharks.
Okay.
No, they
Yeah,
flooded
yeah.
it. That's true. But the sharks was a little, but whatever. It made it a lot of fun. There were ridiculous mutant dogs in the beginning. Who cares?
All right, so according to Google AI search results,
Oh boy.
there's no evidence sharks were ever in the Coliseum. It would have been difficult to transport sharks to the Coliseum
Yes.
because they need to be transported in water vessels, and sharks in the Mediterranean Sea at the time were small and unlikely to bite humans.
Yeah, no, it's.
Unlikely doesn't mean won't.
I mean, but it's like a little finger, like
Right.
not giant man eaters.
It's funny because they did put fish in there.
Yeah,
right?
no,
yeah.
all that is fine, but I don't care. Like, that's what was great about it. What I just described to you was what I wanted. It was exactly sword and sandals. Everything is super serious and overwrought. There's no jokes.
Yep.
But it's great. I want to see Pedro Pascal do every movie, but it's great. It's fun. It's totally worth it. That's a movie.
So going from the 87-year-old director to the 94-year-old director,
Jeez.
Juror number 2, which I gotta think is Clint Eastwood's last movie.
It's 94, right?
You never know. He shoots him in about a month.
Well, hey, the way Warner's treated this movie, I don't know.
Unbelievable. So Juror number 2 was a throwback. First of all, I didn't realize until afterwards that it was about a boy reunion between Toni Collette and Nicholas Hoult.
Oh, yeah.
It's a throwback to the 90s when we used to have lawyer movies come out in the summer and make $200 million. Courtroom movies.
The Rainmaker.
Happened all the time. They weren't all John Grisham books, but mostly were. But it just was a thing. You had the legal thriller.
Presumed innocent.
So all those went away. But this is a throwback to that kind of story. And it's deceptively simple because, it's just a courtroom drama. There's no, monsters or aliens or superheroes. But it gives you a lot of stuff to wrestle with. It's a story about a man who goes on jury duty and finds out he is linked to the case in a way he did not realize. And it leads to all kinds of moral quandaries for him. I'm not going to spoil anything about that, but it's got a great cast. J.K. Simmons is in it. It just gives you a lot to think about. A lot of terrific performances in it. Kind of drama you just don't really see from a studio, certainly, or a high-end production anymore. And so it was just really nice to be in a courtroom story with a lot of moral things to wrestle with great performances. And Clint Eastwood still couldn't direct a movie at 94.
He gets through it by minimizing his movements.
Well, he's
speeches and
always
actions.
shot like 1 or 2 takes. He shoots really quick. He moves really fast. And he has his point of view. It certainly is in this movie. It aligns with other things. He's not a fan of the institutions and thinks they're flawed. And that lives on in here as well. It's totally worth seeing. And it's Ron mentioned it got sort of shunted to the side by Max and HBO or Warner Brothers, whoever you want to call. So very limited release in theaters, where's where I saw it, but it'll be on Max and it'll be totally worth watching one night when you need like an intelligent drama.
Turn back the clock to the 2016 All Media Year on Roundup podcast that we did nearly, 8 years ago. I talked about a movie called Green Room. In fact, I believe that it was my first movie I talked about in the podcast, so it must have been my favorite movie of the year. And that was directed by Jeremy Saulnier. And I had no idea until, honestly, a couple of days ago that same writer-director released a new movie this year called Rebel Ridge. And the reason why I didn't know is because it was a Netflix movie. It came out in September, and it just completely...
Sure. Movies go to die in the zeitgeist.
I didn't even notice if it got any theatrical release like Hitman, which it probably didn't.
Yeah.
But I'm sure as hell glad that I realized that this came out and watched it because this was fantastic. So Rebel Ridge, the only star that you guys probably recognize, 2 stars in it. Don Johnson is the main bad guy. James Cromwell has a small role in it. And then Aaron Pierre, who I believe was cast in the Green Lantern show, right?
Jon Stewart, yeah.
Yeah, he's going to play Jon Stewart. Aaron Pierre plays the lead. And this is basically, trying to think of the movie comparison of it, one man against the system kind of movie.
Sure.
Aaron Pierre plays a guy who goes, you're somewhere in the South, and he's going to bail out his cousin out of jail, and he's got cash on him, $10,000 for bail. He gets pulled over by the cops, and the cops decide to seize the money, and they say that it might be drug money. And then he goes on a mission to try to get his money back and then eventually get his cousin out.
Like Thelma.
Uncovers a very wide conspiracy involving the chief of police played by Don Johnson. And Don Johnson and the police push back on him. He pushes on the police, and it becomes a pissing contest, a war of escalation. And much like Green Room, which I don't know, did either of you guys ever watch Green Room?
Yes, I did.
So really much tension and such a a nuanced approach to violence and to action. That same feeling was present in Rebel Ridge. I honestly, both of you, I think you guys should both watch this movie. I think it is excellent. It works on every level. It ends a bit abruptly, but movies have to end, and it just, sometimes you gotta end the story. But the way stuff gets revealed and the way the character development is handled is just fantastic. And Jeremy Saulnier, I think, is just a fantastic filmmaker. And much like Guadagnino, everything this guy puts out, I want to watch. So I can't recommend Rebel Ridge more.
Speaking of movies that I didn't really expect much out of, I went and saw Wonka with the family. Didn't want to go. Turned out it was delightful. You got a remake of a movie that, in my mind is perfect, but certainly of a time, where they lead, if we're talking about Gene Wilder, what are you going to do, Timothy Chalamet? You're going to do that? Come on. But what it turns out is that it was a sort of a prequel to Willy Wonka and a really sort of beautiful production, again, full of British TV actors. I was like, I know all these people from shows that nobody around me knows. Tons of people from Peep Show were in that. I even found myself not caring about musical numbers that came up out of nowhere. Again, like a classic kind of all ages, I was going to say fantasy, not fantasy like that, but, a fantastical sort of world, like what you want out of a movie. Like it's an old-timey movie. You're going to see this is a theme with me. I don't like new things. This was like an old thing. But, old things aren't always good. So if they're fresh and have life and are fun, then they're worth it. And for me, I'm talking about a thing that, I expected nothing of. Did not want to go. And walked out, and my one son liked it, the other one didn't. But like my younger son was like, "Yeah, it was fantastic." I was like, "It was." Good time at the movies.
It's good.
I think this Timothy Chalamet kid,
He's a movie star.
He's got something.
He does. It's weird, but he does. He's a very good actor. I was very excited when I announced Saturday Night, the film from writer-director Jason Reitman and co-writer Gil Keenan, which is a fictionalized-ish story of the first night of Saturday Night Live, the first night it was broadcast. We're all huge Saturday Night Live fans. It's, one of the most important shows ever made in the United States and still important today. And so, love the original cast, grew up in New York City, would see the people around all the time. So you feel very much a kinship to that show. And so super excited to see this. And, it's not exactly 100% historically accurate. A lot of things are condensed from other days that happened, but it has such a fun, manic energy. My favorite job after college was working in live TV because there's such an adrenaline rush to just getting a show on the air when it's live and you have no choice. And
there can't be a lot of jobs where you can do that anymore.
It's tough.
Live TV, that's interesting. You get to do that.
Lorne Michaels would say, and this is something we would paraphrase, is that the show doesn't go on because it's ready. The show goes on because it's 11:30.
We understand that.
Yeah, so like our show would go on at 5. It's like, well, the show's going on at 5 if we're ready or not. They really did capture that sense of impending doom and terror and panic when you're getting closer and closer and things are going wrong. I thought it was terrific. I thought it was really great actors playing iconic, American comedy stars, and Corey Michael Smith, Chevy Chase was really, really good.
Yeah, what I liked about it was that there's so many of these people that the actors are playing are so well known and so iconic that this is where you run into. Are you going to do an impression, or are you going to get the essence of the character? And there were very few quote unquote impression acting happening here. The guy who played Billy Crystal, I was like, oh, he was great.
Yeah.
Like he was barely, he was not barely in it. He only had a couple of scenes, but he was fantastic. Lamorne Morris doesn't get nominated for Best Supporting. He talked about delivering a master role as Garrett Morris. Yeah. He was fantastic.
I'm sorry, is that like his son or something?
No, they're not related. Just the same last name. Yeah,
it's a big cast. It's not just the cast of the show. It's Lord Michaels and Dick Ebersol and all kinds of people. Big comedy names, Rosie Schuster, and they all get like a moment. They all get a thing. I thought they could have maybe put in some titles of people's names, so people who are not me, who knows what they're looking at. Like I knew who I was looking at, but my wife didn't necessarily always understand why that person was important.
Yeah,
it wasn't ultimately like a big deal, but I just thought it was a really fun, not like an amazing, great movie, but I thought a really smart, fun, funny movie. Totally worth your time, especially if you're an SNL fan.
It was a fun time at the movies. Yeah. I wanted it to be a little better, and I don't know what they did wrong. And this might be a case of me knowing too much, knowing that oh, that didn't happen that night. And it's a pastiche, and you got to understand that. But for what it was, and just
captures the feeling, captures the moment.
Definitely captures the feeling of being at Rockefeller Center. It just, it definitely captured the essence of what Saturday Night Live was.
Yeah.
We'll talk about capturing the essence when Alex Garland's latest film, Civil War, when that came out. I think I ran out as quickly as possible to go see it. And, a lot of people were hemming and hawing over because of the title and given the politically charged nature of the world we live in. And that as a title, wondering what it was. And I was so delighted to see that it was not a movie about politics at all, and rather a movie about journalism and a movie about the feeling of legacy and, at its heart, a road trip movie.
In a war zone. I think that was a big part of the theme.
Sure, yeah, but what was great about it was that it was in a war zone that is on American soil where they never tell you what the conflict was. They tell you who the players were and where they came from, but not why it happened or what happened, which I just loved. Yeah, it just drops you in. And the conceit is that this is a near future kind of storytelling, and the United States is embroiled in a civil war. The president at the time is in his third term, so that tells you, kind of shit has gone to the fan. And California and Texas have united, and they are the Western Front, and they're the ones who are challenging. And these journalists are in New York covering it. It's Kirsten Dunst plays a wartime photographer. And what's the guy's name? I always forget his name. He's fantastic, though.
Pablo Escobar.
Yeah, but his real name.
Mora.
Wagner Moura. Wagner Moura is the writer, and they decide to go down to Washington, D.C. to try to get an interview with the president, who hasn't given an interview for like 18 months. So they go on this road trip. They pick up a young 22-year-old photographer who wants to be like Kirsten Dunst. They've also got a elder statesman writer for the New York Times who's traveling with them as well. And they stumble into battles. They find towns that are ignoring the Civil War. They, find refugee camps, and they run into the worst possible encounter you could have with overly dedicated soldiers. And it was just like stunning imagery, stunning, moments of questioning what your motivations and what is your legacy in your work, and just really strong performances by Wagner Moura and by Kirsten Dunst. And I just, Alex Garland, I think, is a fantastic voice in filmmaking, and I'm glad to see him do a movie like this that was just so well composed and well thought out and executed excellently.
Here's another shockingly stressful movie that I don't ever want to see again. Really liked it. It's fine.
I didn't think it was that stressful.
Yeah, I didn't either.
I found it to be, especially up to the last scene. So that's sort of what it left you with, I guess, was sort of that. It was stressful. It was like, what an awful world to have to be in, just as an idea. Incredibly well done. I thought it was really great, and I appreciated it maybe more than I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Let's go with another surprise. The Fall Guy was not on my radar in any way. And then I happened to see like a trailer for it right before it came out. So I had no choice but to watch it, because I was just like, I don't know what this, I don't care. And I watched it and I go, God, that actually looked really good, which surprised me. I don't know why. It's just because it seemed like one of those big movies. And it didn't do well, right? Is that the case?
It did all right.
It didn't do well.
But it was a big media push.
They bailed on it early. They moved up the pay one window and sent it to streaming like very short.
It didn't do well,
Yeah.
So I went, and it was great. It was what that trailer promised and more. Ryan Gosling, obviously very charming, but you need to be able to write around what that charm is, and the people in the movie, everything has to be right to make that work. And in the end, it's a love letter to not just movie making, but a specific part of movie making, the movie within a movie of the stuntman, which is a thing that we don't talk about it enough.
Give them that Oscar
Quentin
Tarantino's
done some things about it. There's no Oscar category. It was really fun, and because it was about stuntmen, there were some amazing stunts, and in my mind, they were all practical. So, as much as that is as possible, but a really complex plot with twists and turns and a love story, the whole deal. Emily Blunt was fantastic in it. A really great time at the movies. I'm really glad I saw that in a theater. And that's really one of the things where you need to. It wouldn't have worked as well at home, unfortunately, for everyone listening.
When I was on a plane recently, the guy in front of me was watching it, and I was laughing watching it over his shoulder with no sound.
Nice.
Because I knew what was happening in the scene. It's just incredibly fun. Like, that was the thing I took away from it. It was like, it's an action comedy in the best possible way, where it was still a smart story. I still cared about the characters. I was invested in the love story, but it was incredibly fun. The stunt stuff was amazing. The humor was really strong. I'm really bummed it didn't do well, because it was, I thought, like a perfectly well-made movie for what it was.
Yeah. It almost had a little, we were talking about this earlier, it had a little of that early Guy Ritchie energy to it. Like, it was always moving. You were meeting people left and right, and things were always shifting. You weren't quite sure where anybody stood. Yeah, great flick. I'm really glad I got to see it.
Those are the films we enjoyed this year. Let's move on to television. And the standard disclaimer is there are way too many shows. We all get to pick 5. If there's a show we don't talk about, it doesn't mean we didn't like it. It doesn't mean we didn't think it was great. It just means we had to pick 5 each. That means 15 shows out of the 4 million that are produced. And this is what we got. This is the best we can do. We can't be here all day.
We're doing our best.
We can't even watch them all.
Trying. Yeah. I will say though, I have reached a nice little balance of between myself and my wife, of the shows that are available at any time, picking a handful of shows at a given time and building a weekly viewing schedule and progressing through them at our own pace. This was a good year for that. I never felt too behind. I never felt like I was missing out on anything. There was stuff that we went back in time. We watched the John Adams HBO show that we had never watched. You know, like we were able to fill in the gaps because, you know, they're definitely seasonal, like, oh God, there's too much to watch. And then, oh my God, there's nothing to watch, right? We were able to get at least consistency throughout the whole year and be entertained whenever we wanted to be.
Wait, can we take this whole segment to talk about John Adams?
If you want, it was fun.
So good. Let's talk about the smallpox vaccination scene.
Oh God, that was brutal. That was brutal.
I saw a little quick, teaser for Shōgun. I didn't really know what it was. I know it was a very big deal of a TV miniseries just before I was old enough to sort of notice it.
It was like Shōgun and Roots were like the miniseries.
Yeah. By the way, if you really like the show, don't go back and watch that. Other than it's like, whoa. But I saw it, I thought, oh, that's something that looks really interesting to me. I want to make a point to watch that. And so I started watching it when it came out, and then I was very surprised. Like Connor's like, no, it's a really big deal. And I was like, no shit. Because I operate in a bubble where I don't really understand that. Again, you're talking about period piece, takes place in history. I'm air quoting that because it's not actual history, but it is based on things that happened in
1600s, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I sort of watched that first episode and I was like, I really like this. And one problem I had is that most of it is in Japanese. And so if I'm going to watch it, like I have to find time for myself to sit there and I can't do anything else.
It's so great that they committed to doing it with Japanese actors in Japanese, and you've got to read the subtitles. It was like such a great hour visit the world of Shōgun. I love the attention demanding of it.
The casting was fantastic. All those people get nominated for Emmys, and I thought it was deserved, but I was also like, there's other people who should have had Emmys that you didn't put in there. Not in a bad way. Like, it was just, there was so many great performances, I thought. The story is really captivating. Again, it's very romantic. It's very, I was going to say, romanticizes this people and the culture, but it sort of gets you somewhere, and it puts you in a different place than where you live. And I think that was really the draw for me. It is the only show that I can think of in a very long time that I watched again.
Yeah.
I don't think I finished it a second time just because, again, what I just said, it was hard to find the time for me to be like, okay, I'm going to watch through this again. But what a delight. Like a sort of big budget, period piece. It's a show in the spirit of what we used to think of as miniseries, which are kind of hokey now.
Everything's a miniseries now. Everything's a miniseries now. Yeah.
But this one followed through with actually what that meant. Felt special.
I mean, it's all about Abishige.
Yabu.
Yeah, he was fantastic. He was everybody was fantastic.
Yeah.
All of the performances on the show were of such a caliber. Mm-hmm. Anna Sawai was amazing.
Yep.
Even Cosmo Jarvis. I mean, like I spent weeks talking like Cosmo Jarvis.
Yeah. Anna Sawai, you could not look at her. I mean, she was just like that reserved nature. And then Cosmo Jarvis, I don't know, man, how he managed to be kind of dumb and kind of smart and kind of heroic and kind of like he was everything at once. He was kind of the hero, but also you're like, I don't know about this guy. He did a lot, I think, in a role that required it. I don't think did he get an award?
No, he didn't. He didn't. Yeah. He was great. He was so good.
But, I wouldn't take him away from anybody. Great show. Really
The
glad
original
we got
Shōgun had a 33 share.
Jeez, that's
that
crazy.
means 1/3 of all TVs watched it.
You can go and just on YouTube, watch a little of the first episode and it's like, woof. That's
so great show. Great show. For me, my show of the year was the HBO show Industry. Its third season started airing this past August. I had never watched an episode of the show.
Before you get into it, I do want to make a point about that. Like, I would drive around LA, and LA is like the whole business of billboards is dominated by Hollywood. And so that's how I find out about shows a lot. And I saw that billboard for Industry, and I was like, third season?
Yeah.
Of what? I'd never heard of it before.
I remember when it came out. It came out in 2019, and I remember seeing the logline. Like, so it's about the finance industry in London. I was like, whatever. But then I'll give credit where credit's due. Listening to the podcast, The Watch, hearing the guys on that show talk about it, and kind of being excited for season 3 and talk positively about the show. And we were in one of those gaps when it was in the summer where there wasn't much to watch. And I said to my wife, I'm like, you want to give the show a try? And so we started. And honestly, Conor, it was when I was in LA. Yeah. The last time I was in LA and you and me and Hank and Romo were hanging out, I was talking to Romo about it, and Romo made the comment, he's like, oh, it's great because TV seasons now are 8 to 10 episodes. And with the third season coming up, you can start season 1 right now and watch a 20 plus episode season of TV like we used to.
Right.
Right. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good point. That's how I kind of thought about it. And so every time we had a gap when there wasn't a weekly show going on or whatever, or we worked it into our weekly schedule, we started at season 1, episode 1, and went all the way into this year's season 3 and watched 3 seasons of Industry over the summer. And I got to tell you, this show, I talked about it on the podcast previously, I think, but this show is such a vibe.
It's bonkers. It's a bonkers show.
I absolutely love the score and the soundtrack. It's using a kind of like M83-esque kind of synth music that ebbs and flows and swells and retreats based off the drama of the show, which I think is fantastic. And, it follows 3 young out of college graduates who get a job at a financial institution in London, and it follows their lives over 3 seasons. And it's not perfect.
No.
Season 2 had some detours. I was like, what's the point of this? Whatever. But season 3 brought it all back with such a bang and such a crescendo, and every episode has stakes, and
delicious.
Nearly every episode with season 3 ends where like that could have been the season finale with the cliffhanger that happens or the big thing that happens. But the guys who make the show aren't afraid to hold back on a beat to wait to the last episode. They just do it whenever it makes sense for the story. And you just can't wait for the next episode to see what's going to happen, what's going to come out of these people's mouths. And I just can't recommend it enough. I'm totally hooked. I think it's fantastic. You get enough of the business world and the world of finance, which like half the time, I don't understand what they're talking about. I don't understand shorting and margin and all this sort of stuff, but like, you get the sense of what the emotion is behind what they're talking about with the business, and therefore you can understand it. And then it delves into their personal lives, and there's great drama with that. It's fantastic.
It's Billions meets Euphoria. There's a shocking amount of graphic sex.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
What was the title again?
Industry.
Industry. But it wouldn't matter if you didn't care about the people.
Yep.
As despicable as most of them are, which is fine.
Yep.
A lot of great drama comes out of watching despicable people be despicable, but it's about high finance in London, an old legacy American bank's London office, and Ken Leung is terrific in it.
Oh yeah, he's so good.
The 3 young leads are all great, but Ken Leung as sort of their grizzled manager is great, and he keeps changing his allegiances, and every season the allegiances totally get blown up and put back together in different ways. It was addictive. It was like I'd have to keep watching it. Like some days I'd watch 3 in a row.
It's so good. And honestly, like I keep talking about, but I just love how the score works and the music of it and this world, and being a visitor to this world that I have no interest in or knowledge of, but it is so well done and it looks great. It just, it checks all the boxes on what you want from like an HBO show.
Yeah. I think season 2 was the classic hampered by COVID season. Like they got screwed, and season 3, man, makes you so mad about the world.
Season 3 was great.
Curtain back on the power structures behind money and behind governments and behind, therefore the world. You're just like, fuck all those guys. So it gives you a little bit more than just the titillation and the drinking and the short selling.
So much cocaine.
Again, I think we talked about this on the media split.
Honestly, this sounds too much like my real life.
Am I the only one not doing cocaine on a regular basis? Is that why I'm so tired and no one else is?
What I don't understand is the doing cocaine and then going to work the next morning and not missing a beat.
Well, that's what the cocaine wakes you right up.
I guess.
Well, do you do the cocaine like in the morning to make up for the cocaine that you did? Is that how that works? It's all very
casual, though. They're all just casually, constantly doing cocaine. You're just like, I think everyone is
doing
doing
cocaine. If you're going to do cocaine, you have to be casual about it. Like, you can't every time you can't be like, oh, I can't believe I'm doing cocaine. Like, that's the point, I think.
And then shake the bag everywhere. And then
that's why I wouldn't be good at cocaine.
That's why people stop sharing it with you.
Yeah, people say one thing about Josh. They say, well, the first thing I think about him is that he's bad at cocaine. You guys have to do that? That's what I do.
Move on to what I think was one of the best shows of the year. It's Reservation Dogs. Ended with its 3rd season this year. A really funny but also emotional look at life on the reservation in Oklahoma, but also expanding to the generational trauma that the tribe was going through, and featured just really great Native actors who you've seen in lots of things, but maybe didn't even know were Native. Getting to do against type. Wes Studi is incredibly funny in his small occasional role he plays. Zach McLennan, who is the lead of the next show I'm going to talk about, plays like a hapless cop in this one, and he's very funny. McLaren, sorry. Really great actors. Dallas Goldtooth and the lead, DeFaro Wunatai and Devery Jacobs. Introduced us to all these wonderful actors and a great voice in Sterling Harjo, the showrunner. It ended really strong, had a great big celebrity cameo towards the end that really worked incredibly well in the story. I really liked it. It was a really, really good show. And I'm glad people were sort of catching on by the end, even though it ended after 3 seasons.
5th season of Fargo came out this year. And Fargo has, since the first episode I watched, has been one of my favorite shows that sort of keeps coming back, sort of to my surprise. And I really like that it's such a weird relationship to the movie Fargo, which is, by the way, an utter masterpiece. And like the show keeps repeating these themes and ideas, not just from Fargo, but from other Coen Brothers movies. It's a really odd thing.
Yeah, it's more of like a Coen Brothers show than a Fargo
except
show.
it isn't. But
Right.
I mean, it is Fargo. Like there's always...
Oh, it's totally Fargo.
There's always a female, either cop or... It's usually a female cop. There's always a female cop because that was what Fargo was basically about. Then there's always a greedy person. And then somebody who you don't think is the bad guy, but they kind of turn into the bad guy. So anyway, 5th season comes back. I didn't love the 4th season.
No, 4th season was not good.
I really wanted to like it. I like what they tried. There were a lot of good things about it, but it didn't quite work, I don't think. It didn't fulfill my expectations. And this season, the 5th season, starring Juno Temple as Dot, the plucky protagonist who you really don't know where she's coming from, and John Hamm as the villain. John Hamm, I don't know what people are talking about, but not enough people are talking about the job that John Hamm did as Roy Tillman in this. Evil. Really evil and scary. It's, like it makes Don Draper look like a great guy. Right. He was so bad and they didn't.
And he was so good at it.
Amazing. And like genuinely threatening. And when he shows up, you're like, I don't know that they can beat this person. And so there was a real threat. Jennifer Jason Leigh is this really interesting character who I couldn't tell you in the beginning. You're like, oh, she's the bad one. And then kind of not.
Don't forget Lamorne Morris, who won an Emmy for the show.
Which I thought was interesting because I thought he was really good at it, but I didn't think of him as being so much of a standout. He was like the good cop.
But he was so understated against type.
Oh, I hope he gets an Oscar now for Saturday Night, and then he'll have an Emmy. Like, that's great. I really like
that's who
him.
that is. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, he was great. There was the weird guy from history. There is also always a sort of supernatural element that doesn't quite make sense. But either way, like season was a total return to form.
Really, really good.
Every episode, was compelling.
Ron, you would love Fargo. And we say this every year.
Yeah, no,
I
just can't get into it. I started watching. I watched the first episode of the Ewan McGregor year, and it doesn't grab me for whatever reason. I just can't. It's one of those blind spots.
David Thewlis in that season, like this all like every season has a fantastic bad guy.
Juno Temple's really good on the show this year.
She can fucking do anything. She was really good.
Yeah,
because she's such a weird looking person. I don't mean that in a horrible way, but she doesn't look like anybody ever, and she's really able to play different characters. Yeah, it was just fantastic. The show gives you a lot of things, and it's great that way.
Shrinking season 2 came back to Apple TV in the latter part of this year, and this was the Jason Segel, Harrison Ford show about therapists, Bill Lawrence of
Scrubs.
Lots of success, Scrubs and Ted Lasso and all that fun stuff. Brett Goldstein also is Ted Lasso is a co-creator of the show, who joined the show this year without a beard and was very disturbing and a much different type of character. This show, just like for me at least, it came out of nowhere when it initially came out with season 1. And why is Harrison Ford doing a half-hour comedy, right? And it appears like most of these sitcoms or comedy shows focus on a main character or one or two main characters and some hook. In this case, it's Jason Segel and his daughter dealing with the tragic loss of his wife and her mother, who's died in a car accident. And the show eventually becomes an ensemble show. And sometimes that's a bad thing, right? Where you kind of lose the thread of what is the show about. It's just like so many plot lines and things like that. Shrinking has done that very quickly. And in fact, season 2, it did it like 0 to 60, where this is completely an ensemble show. And they've created this cast, this community of folks who are all dealing with their own shit. And luckily they're half of them are therapists, so they can all, kind of deal with it and parse through it. And it's not a bad thing, right? Where each of these characters' little subplots or little, kind of stories get intertwined with the kind of main thrust of the show and stays thematically together. And you end up caring about all of them for different reasons, for different levels as they go through their trials and tribulations. And the writing is just so fast and so acerbic at times. And watching Harrison Ford is just a delight, right? Because he's a grumpy old man who's a therapist, and he delivers some really good lines and some really good punchlines. And seeing Harrison Ford, strut comedic chops we didn't always see in his career. So yeah, Shrinking season 2 did not have a sophomore slump at all. In fact, it just got stronger in ways that I didn't expect.
This year saw Dark Winds premiere, and I'm a big Tony Hillerman fan. My mom read his books. I read them all in high school. They're about the Navajo tribal police on the Navajo reservation, the two cops, Leaport and Chi. I loved those characters. I loved those books. There were so many books that followed those lives for 20 years. And so over the course of the last few decades, they did a couple of movies that Robert Redford produced, a couple of TV movies that were really West Studi played Leaport. And then they announced they were doing the prestige drama treatment for these books called Dark Winds, starring Zahn McClarnon, again from Reservation Dogs, and Kiwa Gordon, Jessica Matten. And the first season, super strong, super fun. I saw it on AMC, and then it got the Netflix bump where Netflix licensed it, and it was huge. It's one of those shows that deserves a Netflix bump. Period piece takes place in the 70s on the Navajo Reservation, with these cops trying to just hold it together with lack of funding, and really great drama. And I'm glad people got to see it. I'm glad they're doing more of it, and I'm looking forward to seeing more.
I think that we're now on our third largely Native American-based show. True Detective, what is it, season 4?
Yep.
It had a different subtitle.
Night Country.
True Detective Night Country came out on HBO this year, and I gotta say, I really love the first season of True Detective.
Mm-hmm.
People mostly don't like the second season.
Season 1 was universally loved, right? But I mean, that was really
absolutely.
That was like beginning of prestige TV, right? Like that was
that was The Sopranos.
Of this era, yeah.
It was the beginning of movie stars doing these shows, yeah.
No, I don't mean like Sopranos and all that, but I mean like this time period of movie stars doing TV shows, so much focus on streaming, like this, the past 10 years, yeah.
Here's what I remember is that I sat down to watch the season finale of season 1, and my wife's water broke with my second son. And I was really upset about that for a bit. I remind him of it sometimes.
The timing was just awful.
No, he's great. He's worth it. Anyway, I didn't really like season 2 at all. Like, and I was mad about it. Like, I was like, and then season 3 I could tell was good and better, but honestly, I didn't love it. Like, it didn't really stick with me in any way. So I didn't really want to watch this new season when it was coming up. My wife really wanted to watch it. And so I said, okay, let's do it. And I found myself pretty quickly sucked in. Great cast. Jodie Foster's kind of the lead in this.
She's got potential, I think. I think she's going to go on to good
Man,
things.
I just like, I've said it before, certainly, is that you really don't see, you do now, but for a lot of our lives, you didn't see like a middle-aged woman being the lead in a show like this.
Not in America. It's super common in England.
Right, okay.
I'm just saying it's our thing. Like you can watch a ton of English shows featuring middle-aged women solving crimes.
I know what you mean. Those aren't the English shows I tend to watch, but that's fair.
No, there's a lot of them, though. She
brought this weariness to a character. I kept trying to figure out like if they made her look older or that's what she looks like. And I don't mean that, but like she had the crow's feet. She just looked really haggard. And then I'd see pictures of her in real life. I was like, she doesn't look like that. Did they age her up or whatever? But either way, I just like what she brought to it.
She was an asshole.
Yeah.
Like that was great.
It's true. And the setting, like in Alaska's a weird place, man. And I think that it lent itself to that. Now, one thing Conor and I talk about this when we talk about comics all the time is that a lot of times a supernatural element that is just used to hook people in makes something suck when it doesn't need to be there. And I would say this show skirts the edge of being okay with it. And they kind of don't. There's a supernatural element, or maybe not. Maybe it's fucking Arctic gas. I don't know.
I like the amount of it.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at.
It could be supernatural, or maybe it's not, but people are seeing ghosts on the ice, and maybe they're just loose. Like, I like that you can decide which direction you want to be.
The mystery that sets it off is this Arctic research base where all the people are murdered or disappeared, and they find them all frozen, like flash frozen. And that's the mystery. But then they're searching, it's a detective story, and it's a really good detective story, but there's enough going on that you kind of don't see what's coming. There are going to be twists. John Hawkes was fantastic. John Hawkes is always fantastic, but you want a downtrodden man, just a thin, smokes and drinks too much, but is tired man. He's your guy. Who is the woman, the female lead, who was clearly from Massachusetts? And they did say that because she did not lose that accent. She was fantastic.
Carly Reese.
Yeah, I think she's a mixed martial arts fighter or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just another thing where I've never seen somebody that looks or acts like her in a leading role in a thing like this. And she's fascinating. Her relationship with her sister. And she's sitting there, and as an actor who, I don't think has done that many parts, but she's holding her own with Jodie Foster. She's owning that screen when she's on it. And they both had these full, complete lives. And you kind of forget too that it's called Night Country because I think I was 3 or 4 episodes in. I was like, it's always dark. because I realized they're, like it's always dark. That's the point. They're in that part of the year where it doesn't get light out. And like, so it kind of realized like, oh, this scene could be taking place at 2. I was like, why are these people always going out in the middle of the night? I'm sorry, I'm stupid sometimes. But I think that that's actually the point, is that it makes everything weird.
Yeah.
Like you cannot get your bearings.
It's not good
there's
for
no
you.
light.
It's not good for your mental state.
Why are they going to school? It's so dark. I really loved it. It was the first one I really, really liked. And like appointment television, we would watch it as soon as we could every week.
Yeah.
Great season.
We'll talk about appointment television also on the same time on Netflix. Ripley, we enjoyed the hell out of. This is Steve Zalian's adaptation of, we're probably most familiar with the movie The Talented Mr. Ripley, the Matt Damon, Jude Law movie from late 90s, early 2000s. But that movie was adapted from a novel by Patricia Highsmith that came out in 1955, where Tom Ripley is a bit of a con man and gets pulled into the life of a rich family. Their son is living in Italy and won't come back home to New York. So Ripley is able to convince them that he's a friend of their son's, and they pay for him to go to Italy. And then he cons the son, and it goes from there and becomes a real kind of exploration of identity and what is truth and things like that. Steve Zalian's adaptation of this was about as far away from the Matt Damon, Jude Law movies you can get. Entire thing was in black and white. Thankfully shot in Italy, so the locations are just gorgeous. The performances, not just Andrew Scott, who's the lead, who's delightful. Johnny Flynn plays Dickie Greenleaf, the Jude Law character from the movie. The son who's living in Italy won't come back. Dakota Fanning is great as Dickie Greenleaf's girlfriend, Marge. And just the web of lies and deceit that Tom Ripley unfolds and the corners he backs himself into. The story, I knew the story going into it, so I knew what was going to happen. It was fun to watch with my wife, who'd never seen the movie and never read the novel. So she was coming into it completely blind. So I had that opportunity to kind of watch someone be like, gasp when something happened and oh my God, what's going to happen here? There was a fantastic Italian actor, Maurizio Lombardi, who plays the police officer who's inspecting a death in it, who was fantastic.
I got really excited when you said an Italian actor, and then I was like, what's the name going to be? And you were like, Maurizio Lombardi. I was like, perfect. That was a great name. Thank you.
You know how, Josh, how you mentioned in Shōgun, how it was like you had to watch because of the subtitles.
Yeah.
And yes, there was Italian with subtitles here, but you couldn't look away from it because the cinematography of this was just so fantastic. And there were so many quiet moments, and there were so many just like where you feel the tension through the silence. And it was just delightful. It was so good. I hope they do another season because there are more Patricia Highsmith books, but I doubt it. Also considering the fact that Andrew Scott, I think, is in his late 40s, and the character Tom Ripley is supposed to be like in his 20s.
That doesn't matter with male actors.
Yeah, exactly. If you want a really, really good thriller, if you've never seen the movie or read the novels, don't know what the story is, watch this because it's a great hour of getting lost in a world.
I really want to watch that, and I keep remembering it and then forgetting. I'm
so
gonna put it on a little app right now. Put that on there right now.
Good noir thriller.
For my money, some of the best drama, comedy, excitement on TV this past year was the Paris 2024 Olympics. I'm a huge Olympics fan. I always watch them, but I thought this year was particularly great from top to bottom, at least from the outside, a city and a country that totally embraced it. The setting, the games happening within and around the city in Paris made it one of the most unique looking Olympics ever, to a completely French and baffling to most people opening ceremonies. Which was wonderful. Just the great storylines, the great athletes, everyone who participated. It was one of the most watchable and most fun to watch Olympics I've seen. From top to bottom, from start to finish, it was a complete success. Hugely popular and just great fun. It really gives you that moment, that glimpse of what the world should be, where we all come together and just celebrate, and it was really fun and wonderful stuff. NBC did a great job with putting it all on the app and having it all available on Peacock.
Did you watch on Peacock? Or
some of it, but because of the time difference, I could watch stuff in the evening in Paris happening during the day in LA, so I could have it on in the background while I worked.
Yeah.
So I would watch some things live, and then I'd watch repackaged stuff in the evening, but I also watch specific events that I'd missed on Peacock. So I dabbled in all the ways to watch it.
All the great ways.
All the great ways. It was really great. It was really, really great.
I wish I could enjoy almost anything as much as you seem to enjoy the Olympics.
I love the Olympics.
I mean that in a nice way.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I watched The Gentleman almost on a lark. I really loved that movie. We talked about Guy Ritchie earlier. You may remember that.
Wasn't it one of those shows you got assigned in that game we played on the Media Explode?
I think I had already... Maybe it was.
We all watched a pilot and we all picked...
Yeah, I watched Godzilla.
Yeah.
You got this assigned to you.
I still have to finish that Godzilla show. Monarch, I liked it.
Yeah, Monarch, it was good. It was fun.
In a completely different role.
Yeah.
Anyway, beyond that, I really enjoyed the movie, The Gentleman. And it was the last like adult movie I saw in a theater. Not that kind. before the pandemic. It's because my birthday, we usually go see a movie for my birthday. That's what we went to. And then the fucking world fell apart. I saw Sonic right after that with the kids, but I don't count that. So you're taking a property that, I don't know, was a perfect little movie, and you're doing another thing. And it's not unlike Fargo, actually, in that way. Other than this would be if Joel Coen directed Fargo, because Guy Ritchie did his own movie in a show form with all different characters, same kind of themes, a lot of the same currents that went through, but in a much more long form way. I'm a big fan of Theo James.
He's great. I really like him.
First time I saw him was in The Time Traveler's Wife, that show.
Yeah, I saw that.
I love that book, and I actually like the movie okay, but he's very Henry Cavill like, quite honestly.
There's something about him that, so I think I've seen him in other things earlier, but more recently he was in White Lotus season 2, and he was a cad in that. He was just like, he was not a good guy, but he has a charm about him, right? And then this came in, and he was that charm in the role of the guy you're rooting for. This was a blast to go on the adventure that he went on with the show, and I hope they do more. Are they going to do another season? I think they are.
Yeah, like even if you look at, you look at IMDb, it says, the show goes from 2024 to 2026. So I was like, well, that's a good sign.
That's good. Yeah.
You've got Vinnie Jones, classic Guy Ritchie actor who has to be in there. The woman in the whole time who is, again, it's kind of against type because she's the bad guy to a certain extent. And I don't think they ever did like a romance between the two of them. And I was really happy about that because they operated as peers. Was Kaya Scudolero. And the whole time I'm like, why do I know her? Skins. But like I barely recognize her because she's not a child anymore. Just a ton of really interesting characters. Some of them are very silly. There's a great villain in this. Pierce Quigley plays Gospel John. He's like a crime boss who also is a fundamentalist Christian fire and brimstone kind of guy. If I had a problem, I'm really tired of Giancarlo Esposito playing Giancarlo Esposito.
Same guy, yeah. Yep,
like it's like, you're Gus. I get it.
Yep.
What else do you have for me? Go do Bugging Out from Do the Right Thing Again. But like he shows, I'm like, I know what he's doing. Like, every time it drives me nuts because everybody else in this is so interesting, except Theo James, who just gets to be himself, and that's great. The brother Freddie is so frustrating. It's just that like agent of chaos, and everything else is so cool. This London wealthy criminals all over the place, tough people acting cool and doing tough guy shit. It was a ton of fun. I'm so glad it's coming back.
She was Effie.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it just clicked.
Yeah. Like it's one of those things where like you probably haven't seen her as an adult. You're like,
I know.
Why do I recognize her?
It's so funny because going back to industry, I was reading about, speculation, like where does the show go from here? Because season 3 of Industry ended in a very definitive way. And one writer, I forget what site, but was like, I suppose they could pull a Skins and just give us a whole new cast. And I was like, I forgot about Skins. Like, Skins
is one of those shows like
it's really good.
It was so good.
Like Freaks and Geeks in a way, is that like everybody who came out of it got work for the rest of their, all these people got their start on that show. I barely remember it. Yeah. But I know I watched it, and I know it was compelling.
We all watch it.
And it was a little like, should I be watching this?
Yes, a little bit.
It was the euphoria, but we were in our early 20s, so it's okay.
Yeah.
You know who was, and I'm trying to find his name. He was in Slow Horses. He's in everything right now. The blonde guy who was like...
Jack Loudon?
No.
Oh, Spider.
Oh, Spider. Yeah.
And he was in this, and he had like, his character had a hell of a turn.
He was great.
But he had a year. Him and Jack Loudon, probably actually based on this. But you're kind of looking like, oh, that guy was in everything.
Yeah.
Freddie Fox.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
It's a great show. If you haven't watched it and you like, any of that Guy Ritchie stuff or just a cool, fun, long-form crime story, it was wonderful.
This was a lot of fun. This was very nearly on my list, and I think it's probably in my like 6 to 10 list, but it was really good. I had a deep bench on TV this year. There was a lot. I could do more than 5 for sure.
There are a million shows. Of course you had a deep bench.
So many shows, yeah. But one show that I did not expect that came out of nowhere, again, I have a lot of sitcoms this year. I have a lot of 30-minuters on my list. Another Netflix show, Nobody Wants This. I talked about it on the podcast earlier briefly, but this was the 10-episode rom-com with Kristen Bell and Adam Brody, most well-known from The OC, one of my favorite shows from back in the day. And, the premise of the year is Adam Brody is a rabbi. Kristen Bell, unfortunately, is a podcaster in LA. She is not Jewish. And they get together, and basically this whole show is the ramifications of their pairing. It is worked on every level, and Adam Brody is a delight. and he was excited to see the next episode. The guy who plays his brother was on Veep and is just very, very funny.
Oh, Jonah.
Big, tall guy, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. No.
Really good, really strong. And this was just, tight, focused, 30-minute episodes that kept the plot moving. Yes, cringing the fact that Kristen Bell and her sister are podcasters trying to get a Spotify deal, grown. But beyond that, it was classic romantic comedy, which I haven't had, I think, in a long time. And so it was really nice. It was a modern breath of fresh air. Strong recommendation for that one as well.
Pour one out for Curb Your Enthusiasm. The final season finally happened this past year. Did you guys still not watch it?
No.
I watched the first episode and it was fantastic.
It was a great season. At least watch the finale. You owe it to Larry.
I maybe did. I may have, but that's not a good sign that I'm telling you that.
The guts to basically redo the Seinfeld finale.
That's great.
Curb,
it's a great decision.
But then do it. I like the Seinfeld finale, but I know nobody else did.
I liked it.
To do it funnier and also acknowledge they're redoing it. It's one of those triple needle threads that only Larry seems to be able to do, and he did it. I was genuinely sad it was over because I've liked spending the last 20 years with these people.
It's nice to depend on something like it, right? Yeah.
Even though it's been on so long that when you see the early episodes, you're almost freaked out how young everyone is because it's been going on for 20 years and he was in his 50s when he was doing it.
It wasn't on every year, right? Like
No.
there were enough gaps to make
breaks.
you want it.
Yeah.
They went away for a while at times.
Well, he thought he was done. Then he's like, no, I got more ideas. And he came back.
That's awesome.
If he want to come back in 10 years when he's 90, they're happy to have him back.
Yeah.
Great cast. The final season with Richard Lewis, who passed away before the end. Vince Vaughn joined the cast, basically replacing Super Dave Osborne's role in the show. And he was really funny. He's a great improviser.
That sounds good.
A cavalcade of Hollywood funny people. Conan O'Brien had an episode this season. Susie Essman, J.B. Smooth. Everyone is now legendary. Jeff Garlin.
Yeah.
When I realized what they were doing with the finale, I literally just said, oh my God, are they really doing this? And they did it. And it was really, and Jerry was in it, a big part of it. It was very funny.
I was watching through Oz again, and I tried once before. I mean, I've watched it in the past, but I tried once before, like a few years ago, and I was like, oof, it's too harsh. I can't do this shit. And so I'm watching through it again, and I need a break. So I start scrolling around trying to find something to watch, and I happen to come across Fallout. And I think that was because I was trying to watch Lord of the Rings, and I was like, I don't have it in me today. What else I got?
You misclicked?
No, I started it, and I was like, I don't have this in me right now. So I was like, what's the next thing? Oh, this Fallout show. Somebody I know said something good about it. I think Ron, you said something good about it. It wasn't just you, because you tell me things are good all the time, and I lose track of them.
We specifically talked about it. I was like, hey, the Fallout was surprisingly good.
So you think I remember things, and that's lovely.
Or you just dismiss it outright.
I don't. Honestly, I don't remember anything. So just click it on and I start watching it. And I was like, all right, Walton Goggins is in this. I love Walton Goggins. I'm beginning to think not a lot of range on that guy, but I don't care.
Kyle MacLachlan.
Do you know what's funny is that I started watching, and I must not remember because I was like, does Ron know Kyle MacLachlan is in this? That was a real thought I had. So that'll tell you where I was with it. And I sort of got to the end of the first episode and I was like, I think that was really good. And the only thing that I'd really known about is I think I tried to play the game 1,000 years ago on my PC. And it was one of those like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. And I just stopped.
I like the game in concept because the game is actually a spiritual successor to one of my favorite PC role-playing games from the early 90s called Wasteland.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I remember I played Wasteland in middle school and it was so enthralling. It was fantastic. And they did a sequel to Wasteland. And then the folks who worked on it, they couldn't get the rights to Wasteland from the studio. So whatever. So they did Fallout and there's like little connections from Wasteland to Fallout. But then Fallout took it another direction. They added the Pip-Boy and all that sort of stuff. So like, I think I played Fallout like once in like 2008 or something like that because of that connection. But I didn't get further than leaving the vault. Right. Like,
so I'm watching it and like, it's this really cool, wacky, but very violent world that I kind of just didn't expect. And I watched through it fairly quickly. Luckily, it was kind of week where I had like a lot of the kind of work that I could have something on, when that was happening. And I got to the end of the 8th episode and I was like, all right, next. And I was like, oh, that's it. It was over.
Oh,
I really liked the back and forth aspect about being like, how did the world get to this? How are we? And these are all pretty well-known tropes, but again, at the same time, if it's done well, then you can do the classics. It's fine, and it was done, I think, much better than I would think that it deserved to be. And I don't mean that a bad way.
My hope and the hope of a lot of people in the video game industry is that Fallout seems to show that someone learned something from This Is Us. Not This Is Us, The Last of Us. This Is Us is a different show.
I
Last
played the
of
video
Us.
game This Is Us.
that when you do a show that is high quality but also faithful to what made the game successful.
Yeah.
Because most video game stuff is schlocky, but you have 2 now in a row of really high quality. I haven't seen Fallout yet, but super popular. Like most watched show of all time, I think, on Amazon.
Like they're both apocalypse shows in a way, but they're not similar at all.
Right.
There's a sense of humor to Fallout, which is like a very Garth Ennis-y sense of humor, I think. And there's some gross out kind of stuff in it. Yeah, what a surprise.
I thought they did a good job of introducing the mythology of the Fallout game in the show to give people a sense of how this world was created. I thought they handled that really nicely with the flashbacks and explaining Walton Goggins' character and all that sort of stuff. It's funny because Fallout has so many, it's got different directions it can go in, whether it's the Vaulters or the Knights or the Wasteland people, and I thought it combined all 3 of those worlds in a elegant way that made it engaging and make you want to know more about all 3 of them, not spending too much time on one or the other.
Yeah, and I really just like that, it's stuck with, and this is from the game, is it stuck with the aesthetic of what was happening. Like, here's the vault aesthetic, here's the outside world aesthetic, here's the, 50s Americana aesthetic, and how all those things are related. There's a little bit in the middle where the whole time you're trying to piece together what the hell happened. There's 2 disasters. It wasn't just the one. And that Walton Goggins is actually much older than you think. And so all of that stuff together and the twists and turns, you just don't know where anybody stands. Really, really very good. Shockingly good.
Shockingly good. I guess shockingly good also applies to my last show of the year, which for me came out of nowhere. English Teacher on FX Hulu. This is, again, another half-hour sitcom that is kind of driven and created by Brian Jordan Alvarez, who was on the Will and Grace reboot, and then apparently also, sadly, from TikTok and things like that in terms of 21st century comedy.
It's going to happen to people. You're going to need to get over it. That's how they're going to get in.
I know. But what was fascinating about this show was, do you remember how back in the day, like a new show would come out and the first episode would be like, the pilot would be like a little like, okay, I see it. And then it really took 1 to 5 episodes to get its leggings, get its feet under it and that sort of thing.
And get leggings on.
Get its legs underneath it. Sorry.
They're slippery.
This show out of the gate is fully realized, fully formed. You get the sense of the characters' relationships and it goes from 0 to 60 immediately.
Yep.
And that is something I haven't seen for a very long time. And it continued that tightness throughout the entire run. Each episode is, there are single individual stories. There's a loose storyline about Brian Jordan Alvarez's character and his romantic life that kind of goes throughout every episode.
And the coach.
Yeah, and the cast of characters, their romantic lives as well. But for the most part, each episode's kind of a one and done. Brian Jordan Alvarez plays a English teacher at a high school in Austin, Texas. He is gay.
He is gay.
One of his friends, because that's a part of, his best friend is another teacher. She's got a boyfriend who lost his job and is digging a pool in their backyard instead of looking for work. Their other friend is the gym teacher who's slightly conservative. And it's just this whole kind of cast of characters set in the setting of school, but it's in the, as much as I hate to say it, like the contemporary nowadays woke / anti-woke kind of world of school. I can't imagine being in high school these days. The whole thing sums up by, there was a cold open in one of the episodes. The feeling of the show is summed up by this one cold open where the English class ends, the bell rings, a student hangs behind and talks to Brian Jordan Alvarez, the main character, and he says he's looking for help because he says, he thinks that he might be gay and he's looking for some help in terms of coming out. And Brian Jordan Alvarez's character, who also is gay, just looks immediately pained. And it's like, no, you don't need my help. Just ask any of the 50 other gay kids in your class who came out. They'll help you. Like it's now this trope of something that has been like a overwhelming kind of thing to get over is now just commonplace, right? And you would think that him being the gay teacher would want to help a student, but he's just more annoyed by the ask, right? And that kind of sums it all up. It is so funny. The writing is so at a speed and at a delivery, much like Shrinking, that is just like, you got to stay dialed in to keep up with it. And it was just a blast. Every episode was like an A episode. There was not a bad episode in the bunch.
I think that speed comes from the TikTok generation where everything has to happen very quickly. It's the same thing with Please Don't Destroy on SNL. But
yeah,
the only reason why I didn't have English Teacher on my list is because you beat me to it. I would have also put it on my top 5. Like, I loved the show. I loved every episode of it. I was so mad when it was over. I hope it comes back.
8 episodes was not enough. Like it was like this. It was just, I can't believe how fully formed and excellent it was.
It came out of nowhere, as you said. I didn't know how long it was, so it ended out of nowhere for me. I was like, it was just over. And I was like, where's the new episode? And it was like, that's it. And I hope it comes back for more because you're right. Everyone was great. They all had their characters nailed. I just loved visiting that world for 30 minutes every week.
Yeah, it was a blast.
Yeah. Laugh all you want, but network TV is having a moment. It's dying a slow death, dying a less slow death than previously, dying a very rapidly slow death. The CW is basically at this point all Canadian imports and reality television and sports, and half of the other networks seem to be reality TV game shows, cheaply produced. There's still some prestige dramas, but there have been fewer and fewer shows that I was excited about as each year went on, and I was sort of resigned to the fact that the amount of narrative stories that I was watching on network was going to dwindle down to nothing. And then suddenly in the last 12 months, there's been a mini explosion of fun network TV shows. And so at the end of last season, we had Elsbeth, which was a mid-season replacement, which was a spinoff of Ron and I's favorite show, The Good Wife and The Good Fight. This is the third level of spinoff. And they basically remade Columbo with the character Elsbeth from The Good Wife. She comes to New York and she's Columbo. We find out about the murder. The murderer is the big guest star. It's a battle of wits for the next hour until she figures it out.
Takes a similar approach as with Poker Face, where it shows you what happened and who did it, and then, the enjoyable part is to see how she figures it out. Right?
Really good. Second season, not as good.
Not as good.
First season, really, really good. Second season, they monkeyed with the format. Don't monkey with the format.
I don't think they thought it was going to go more than one season, because in this second season, there's no overarching.
There doesn't need to be
through line.
Just have her investigate a crime.
Yeah, I know.
The crimes are less compelling this season. It doesn't matter. Anyway, the show is still enjoyable. She's amazing.
Yeah, she's fantastic. Carrie Preston's awesome. Yeah.
Wendell Pierce as the captain, as I like to say every week, he can sell any ridiculous network TV line and make it sound good. He's just that good of an actor. The other show that came out in the last year, which I was making fun of when I saw the trailers, and then I sort of unironically love, is Tracker, which is like so dumb but incredibly fun, with Justin Hartley, who was on This Is Us, as the guy who makes money tracking people down. Doesn't exist as a real job in real life, but it's stupid and I enjoy it. Well, the 3 new shows that sort of caused this mini wave, because they all hit the same week, was High Potential from ABC, which is just another Sherlock Holmes show about a super smart person who becomes a consultant for the police. But this one is played by who?
Caitlin
Olsen from Always Sunny, and she's great. The cast is really strong around her, but she's just really watchable. Yeah. And she turns, sort of standard police procedural into something more interesting. The second one is Dr. Odyssey.
Are you really watching Dr. Odyssey?
It's the most fun of all these shows.
We see the next episode teasers before we watch Grey's, and we're like, this show looks like awful.
Ryan Murphy doing Love Boat, which is basically Joshua Jackson as the ship's doctor and his 2 sexy assistants, who by the 4th episode, they all had a threesome together.
Jesus.
It's crazy. And it's sexy. And it's Ryan Murphy doing a network show with Joshua Jackson. Women of a certain age make noises when he comes on screen. He's really great. And then finally, Matlock, which... Listen, I rolled my eyes when I heard they were remaking Matlock, but Kathy Bates should never be underestimated. Even at nearly 80 years old, she still owns the screen.
You have become a CBS viewer.
I've never not been a CBS viewer.
I know, it's true.
He's just finally in the right demographic that he's been performing as all along.
This show's really, really good. It has an unusual, unexpected twist that I won't spoil, but it's really kind of meta and smart. And she's just really, really great. She's one of the best actors of our generation, I think, doing a TV show, because what else is there to do? There's no movies left, other than the ones we talked about already. But that's it. Network TV is back, and there's other shows I'm already watching, but this little explosion of new... I really thought we were done with new shows because they were not making them. They're not really paying for them. They're dying. But anyway, those are the TV shows we enjoyed this year. Let's take a moment quickly to thank everyone who has supported us throughout the year. These last 12 months, supporting the iFanboy family of shows. The shows wouldn't happen without you. There are costs associated with making them. There's time costs and money costs, and you help pay the bills because that is the media landscape we live in now, the listener-supported landscape. And the main way to do that is patreon.com/iFanboy. Lets people go who directly want to support the show. They become part of a great community in Discord and Facebook, and they get to have the monthly patron hangout in which the 3 of us and our special guest friends hang out with you once a month for an hour to 3 hours and just chat. It's nonsense time. It's a good therapy session for everybody. It's a good time. If you want to sign up, you can do a monthly. There's all kinds of tiers. You get all kinds of merchandise associated with those tiers. But if you want to sign up for 1 full year, you get a discount. You get to do it cheaper, and you still get all the benefits. Go to patreon.com/iFanboy to find out how. Also, If you want to receive the gift of membership, if you said, like, I want to be a patron, I want to support these guys, but I really can't swing it with what's going on in my life, tell your friends, tell your family, put it on your wish list. Patreon.com/iFanboy/gift. They can sign you up for membership. But even better than that is to just start giving people gifts. Give them away. Start signing up for your friends, your family, your coworkers, your boss. Make them all patrons of the show. It'll be very confusing and very awesome for all.
But good for us. Really good for us.
And for you, you'll find it funny while your friend's like, thanks. Give them a yearly membership. That'll be great. iFanboy.threadless.com is our merchandise store.
I don't want this shirt.
Where we have 20 designs on t-shirts and more. That's right, 20. We had 13 from the last 2 or 3 years, but now we've got 20 because we added 7 new designs, and we're thinking about more. You can check them out. There's all kinds of fun in jokes about comics on there, and you will love it, and you will love the questions you get. It's a great conversation starter. What did you do 35 minutes ago? There's all kinds of things you could say to that. There's also a holiday sale going on. Threadless loves their holiday sales. So right now, for the next few days, if you listen to the show as it comes out, there's a $15 tee and V-neck sale. Everything else will be on sale for some various level, but tees are $15, and that's what most people buy. Check it out. iFanboy.threadless.com. iFanboy.com/support is our direct donation PayPal tip jar. If you are an eccentric billionaire and it's the end of the year, you've only got a few weeks left till the year's over and you need to drop anywhere from $50 to $250 million, you can do it there. If you need to lose that money, why do it? You don't need another jet. Who needs a third jet? Give to us. That would be helpful.
Get 2 jets.
Keep the 2, but you don't need a third.
No, the one is the extra one. It's excessive, but like I get it. It's America.
Your jet and your spouse's jet. Your kid doesn't need their own jet.
No, you're not using 3 jets at one time.
Think about the fuel costs. You will love the savings, and we will love not having to work anymore. iFanboy.com/Amazon is our general shopping link. You still have a couple weeks left till the holidays are over, and you might need to do some last-minute shopping. Please consider doing it at iFanboy.com/Amazon. You can always click on any of the links on our website. It helps us out and doesn't hurt you in the end. We do appreciate that. Finally, bookshop.org is our partner that helps local bookstores out. When you order books through bookshop.org, a local bookshop, independent bookshop, fulfills that order and gets the money, and it's great. And you can find those links on any of our Booksplode show posts. And thank you very much to all the people throughout the year who helped us out, literally keeping the lights on. We do appreciate it. We could not do any of these shows without you. So thank you.
All right, with that, let's get into music for the year. Connor, you can probably...
I'm going to go check the PayPal to see if there's any billionaires in the last few minutes have done it.
Yeah, do that.
Okay.
This wasn't live, Connor.
See what the latest baseball signings are.
Right.
All right, so music-wise, album of the year for me was the album Guided Tour by the band High Vis. High Vis, I've been aware of them for a little bit. They're a UK-based band that falls under the hardcore kind of genre. They came up through the hardcore scene. I've heard them on playlists through the years and things like that. I knew they existed. I knew the name, but I heard the first single off of this record, Guided Tour. It's a song called Mind's a Lie. And some bands, not all bands do this, and Josh, I don't know if you've experienced this or not, but some bands transcend their origins.
Sure.
They level up to a certain degree, or they go under. And with this record, that's what High Vis has done. They broke out from the world of hardcore or post-hardcore and embraced their Britishness and delivered a record that has hardcore roots, and you can hear the connections to hardcore, but becomes just a fantastic British rock album, rock song. The song itself, Mind's a Lie, to me, like if they did a third Trainspotting record, this song would be perfect on the soundtrack, right? Like that kind of positioning. It also helps that the cover art of the album is very Trainspotting-esque with the orange and the Helvetica font and things like that. There's not a single skip on the album. It is a straight-through banger. It is fantastic. I got the chance to see them. They toured the U.S. and their last show was in Brooklyn, so I was able to go to that and saw them play live, and they totally delivered. What I thought was interesting was that at the live show, they were just straight up a hardcore band. They did not play that song, Mind's a Lie. Right, the best song on the record, they didn't play it. And I went back and looked on their set list. They didn't play it the entire tour. Right?
We don't know how, mate.
Which is a great flex, but just like really, really good songs, good breakdowns, good choruses, good, stuff you can sing along to. The songs get kind of stuck in your head. Great commuting / walking through a city music with it in your headphones. I can't say enough about High Vis. They just totally blew me away. And I'm glad that this record came out and really kind of blew away every other kind of option for album of the year for me. So check it out. Guided Tour by High Vis.
In July, I went to go see at Fenway Park the spectacular of Rancid, Smashing Pumpkins, and Green Day, and also the Linda Lindas who played before I got there. Sorry. I didn't want to go. Not because I'm too cool for anything. I just hate stadium shows. But my wife and my 10-year-old, is he 10 then? Yeah, he was 10. They wanted to go. So I was like, all right, no, fine, I'll go with you guys. And I was very excited to go see Rancid. I was like, oh, this is great. But it's in a huge stadium. And no one was really there when I walked in, they were actually playing. And they were great. It was really fun to watch them like be super comfortable in this big spot and just sound like Rancid. And everybody sings along. And it was really fun. I like that. I was very curious about Smashing Pumpkins. Ron and I have talked about this before, is like 2 or 3 all-time amazing songs. Other than that, I'm good. It was so boring. Like, I don't know how you can tell, like, you can be like, that dude does not want to be here. And I know that I'm writing my own narrative, but there was certainly a little bit of like, he's so mad that he's opening for Green Day. Like, so mad. But like, the worst thing is just like, I'm saying he, because Billy Corgan, the other people tend to move around. Not Jimmy Chamberlain. Jimmy Chamberlain is a fucking amazing drummer. I have no complaints about Jimmy Chamberlain. He's amazing. And the Smashing Pumpkins are a good band. But he's out there in his like weird Roman Catholic, priest outfit still. I'm like, let it go. Wear a shirt. It doesn't matter. But there was just nothing. Like, we're doing the songs. They sounded fine or whatever, but there was just nothing coming from it. And I was like, this is why I don't like a stadium show. It's so impersonal and whatever. And then Green Day takes the stage. And like, I am not a big Green Day fan. I'm not against, like, as a punk rock person, I think they're a punk rock band. They're just a very successful punk rock band. They came from the indie scene. Like, they're a punk band. They're very successful, but whatever. Ron, I think you're with me on this, yes?
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, like, we're not the kind of, like, oh, they're not real punk. They are.
No, they are. Yeah, totally.
Right. And they start the show, and I just think, man, I don't like these big shows, but they're really good at this big show. To control an entire stadium, they played all of Dookie, and then they played all of American Idiot. And those are 2 very good albums.
I saw them play Madison Square Garden in 2000.
Yeah.
They rocked it.
Yeah, and I remember when American Idiot came out, and it was Ron, you and me, and Ryan Panagos, and we all had this conversation like, is this album really, really good? Yeah. And like, we were kind of all surprised.
Because we wrote it off. I mean, honestly, for me, after Dookie and then Nimrod, like all those records, I was like, it's fine. Like, they're going to go do their thing. But like, I had my moment with them 93 to 95, and okay, I'll let them move on.
I've never even owned a Green Day album. Like, I know it because it's around. Yeah. It just wasn't a thing.
Well, I have the first 2 on 5. I think I have early pressings of the first 2.
They were so good. And like, Billy Joe was such a good front man. I was like, oh, this is what a studio rock show is. It was like, again, when Ron and I were at Riot Fest last year and the Foo Fighters took the stage, like, we were looking at him and it was very like scientific, like, oh, he's like this rock guy. And it was like that, except I enjoyed it.
Right. I
was really impressed. I don't know that I've seen a real rock star do the big rock star thing in a really long time. The rest of the band was great. And like, they just had all the energy. Like, the crowd was really very diverse in terms of like all ages. And because they played, the album from 94 and then the album from 2006 or whatever year it was, like, it covered a lot of ground. It was really fun. I was kind of very surprised, but I'm really glad that I went. All of mine are about, I didn't think I was going to like this, but then I did. Everything I've talked about said. Anyway.
Classic Josh. To stay somewhat on topic there, one of the surprise albums for me this year, one that I ended up really enjoying, includes Billie Joe Armstrong. And it's not the new record from Green Day called Saviors. Rather, it's the new record from his other band, Pinhead Gunpowder.
It was the Saviors tour. Didn't play Saviors.
Yeah, well, they played some songs from Saviors on it, didn't they?
Maybe in the middle. There was a couple, but...
Yeah. And Saviors was all right. I mean, I listened to it. I'm like, oh, there's some all right, but it didn't grab me. So Pinhead Gunpowder, which is Billie Joe Armstrong, as well as some other folks from the Bay Area punk scene, including Aaron Comet Bus on drums, who was in Crimshrine, just like classic kind of like Lookout Records circa 1992 supergroup band. And, they put out a record in the mid 90s, Jump Salty, that I loved. I mean, they've done stuff here and there over the years, but this is kind of the first record in a while. The album is called UNT. I was so excited to see it. Aaron Combus does the art direction for the band, and so it has that look. You can tell what a Pinhead Gunpowder record looks like. He's got a very distinctive handwriting. I was going to say handwriting font, but it's actually his handwriting style where they do the lyric sheets and everything. And honestly, like Pinhead Gunpowder, I love it because it completely transcends time. You could listen to this record now and be told it was from the 90s and believe it, and vice versa with their other record. There's just a steadiness of those songs. And I love that they delivered a new record. It was as good as the previous ones and just fits right into the library of all their releases. And I thought it was really interesting and funny that, like, Green Day comes out with a new record. And there was like a month where all I heard like on podcasts and radio and online stuff like that was Green Day's new record. They were very present in media. And then like 3 months later, there's a new Pinhead Gunpowder record. And I was more excited about that.
This is going to sound like such a snot thing to say, but like my favorite Green Day song is Life During Wartime by Pinhead Gunpowder. And I know that like, it's not Green Day, but it, you know, if you didn't know, you'd think it was. I was like, this is great. And it's like, oh, it's not Green Day.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I love Pinhead Gunpowder. So if you like good Bay Area punk, like early Green Day or Crimpshrine or that sort of thing, if you're not listening to Pinhead Gunpowder, check them out. You'll be thankful for it. Additionally, there was a new record from a new band, but an old guy that I feel like I've talked about in every podcast, but John Reese out of San Diego, who was in Drive Like Jehu and Rocket from the Crypt, and is just a legendary guitarist, legendary songwriter. He has a, putting in air quotes, new band. He's done his solo work under the act name of Swami John Reese, but he finally put a band behind it. So the band is now called Swami and the Bed of Nails, and they put out the album All of This Awaits You, and I got to see them when they toured. I saw them in Manhattan. They played at the Mercury Lounge, and it is just John Reese brand bombast San Diego garage punk perfection. John Reese has a way of writing a song that's like a freight train. Like it's just got this like steady beat that goes at you with this hard guitar sound, and you can't not be moved by every song. They're just fantastic. Live, very spiritual cousin of Rocket from the Crypt. John Reese was in full frontman mode. They all got matching kind of tiki bar, Hawaiian shirt kind of style. And, you know, in between song banter and laughing and just having fun. If any of that stuff resonates with you, you know, 60s garage rock meets punk kind of thing, Swami and the Bed of Nails will definitely be up your alley. And then additionally, I too fell for the big surprise of this year, which was an album called Diamond Jubilee by Cindy Lee. Did either of you guys, I shared it with you guys at some point. Did you guys look into this at all?
No.
So Cindy Lee is the performer name, band name or performer, whatever, behind Patrick Flegel, the songwriter and performer of it, Canadian musician. And out of nowhere, he dropped an album on YouTube that was 2+ hours, like a quadruple side record, basically, and basically a double album or whatever it was. Put it on YouTube in one single thing, created a early 2000s website, GeoCities like website that linked to the YouTube. And what it was almost like a throwback 1960s Phil Spector Wall of Sound kind of dream pop kind of approach. And the experience was basically like you put the record on YouTube and just put it in the background. It's like being on the radio and just listening to song after song after song. And this has been highlighted, like pretty much everybody, all the critics and stuff like that, from Pitchfork and Paste and Rolling Stone and everybody. This is showing up on everybody's album of the year. It's not on a label. It's completely self-released, self-produced, came with no PR, came with no marketing whatsoever, just dropped it on YouTube. And it's like 32 songs that are just fantastic. You know, just really kind of, you know, almost they transport you to another place. They're just so kind of like, it's great. I put it on when I'm working. It's great kind of background music. And this like kind of, again, I go with like kind of dream pop kind of description for it. Psychedelic pop kind of, you know, it could be described for it. But it is nearly a perfect double album, which is no easy feat. It is fantastic.
Earlier this year, music fans and people who don't even know they're music fans lost Steve Albini. Legendary, a lot of things.
Yeah.
Record engineer and producer. That's primarily what people know him for. But he was also in a lot of bands. He was in Big Black, the less well-known Rape Man.
Unfortunately named 80s band. It wasn't recent.
No, it's true. And he knew perfectly well what that was, but
yeah,
he was edgy. That was his thing. But he had a band called Shellac, and I'm full of regret because it's one of those bands that, you know, you'd mentioned for a really long time. I just never got to it for whatever reason. And when I finally did start listening to Shellac, I was like, where have you been all my life? It really was like a moment like, oh my God, I love this sound. I love this kind of music. And I listened to it a lot before he died, but not before it was cool. Him dying, I'm very sad about it. As sad as any other rock star, you know, like a lot of people feel about Prince. I feel that way about Steve Albini being gone because he was a singular personality.
Produced so many records that everyone listening to this podcast have loved.
Yes.
Right? I mean, Nirvana, Pixies, like he is singularly responsible for crafting so much of alternative music as we know it, as well as also being an amazing musician and songwriter with his own work.
And like as a secondary thing, and even the only thing he ever did was that music, to certain among us, you know, he would be held in as much regard, but it's almost like a side project.
Yeah.
No one's ever recorded drums or made them sound better in rock music than Steve Albini. And I thought that before I knew who he was. I was like, I like the drums on this. I thought that for years. I found out that Helmets, in the meantime, I was like, he did that because he's uncredited? And I was like, of course. I've loved those drums forever. Anyway, shortly after he passed away, right before it happened, Shellac had recorded a new album, and it was released pretty quickly after his death.
For those who don't know, his death was sudden. It was a heart attack when he didn't see it coming. So it wasn't like the David Bowie where like he timed the album to release with his death. Yeah,
no, he was a relatively young man still, and so I got the record and I held on to it. I didn't open it for a little while. I was like, I'm afraid I'm not gonna like it, and I think that would bum me out. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I put it on one day, and for whatever reason, the man is very good at sequencing. And so that first song on an album, first and second songs are usually like really hooky. Hooky's not the word for this, but like they pull you into it. The album is, and Shellac in general, but this album it's very groovy. It hits a groove, and you just have this sort of like, he'll do like a repeating riff groove thing, and it plays back and forth with the drums. It's very stripped down. It's guitar, drums, bass, and then sometimes vocals will come in another. And I just sitting here listen to it, and like it just put me in this space. And it's not a space that you would think, like hardcore, post-hardcore, whatever it is that would you in, but it was like a groove thing. And I was just listening, and I've listened to it so many times over and over. Just get that man a medal, and it just go over, and it just keeps going. And the whole thing, you can just listen through and just really like enjoy it. You can enjoy it listening actively. You can enjoy it in the background. I will drive around and listen to it, and it's such a bummer. They'd been moving up my list of like, I have to find some way to see this band.
I was trying to get you to see them. I was looking like,
I know.
Yeah.
And it was like, and I was thinking before it was too late that I have to find this band before it's too late. And I didn't think about it in that terms. And I would look, and like, they never come east. They play Spain and the West Coast.
Pre-pandemic, they did a bunch of times, and then post-pandemic, their touring went way down, and they would only play like Primavera, that music festival in Europe, and they played like a handful of shows each year for the past couple of years, but they were going to tour with this new record.
I know.
I feel so bad that you didn't get to see them live, because I was lucky enough to see them 3 or 4 times. I saw them in San Francisco. I saw them at All Tomorrow's Party. I saw them in New York. They were so good. The fact that the drums were always in the center of the stage, and Albini was to the right, and Bob Weston to the left. Like, it was such a great show. And I'm sure you've watched live video and stuff like that on YouTube, but and that doesn't compare. But that's the closest you can get to it, and that's an experience, and you should watch that.
I don't know how to recommend it to you if you've never, but if any of this sounds good, like give it a listen. It's really worth it. Ron and I will talk about underground music a lot, old men's underground music now. And you might think, I don't know. I'd say give it a shot. It's great stuff. And it's not like super punk or hard, or you couldn't get into it or whatever, but it's something that is clearly, it is always going to be underappreciated and more unknown than it should be. Yeah. Just good music. So this is interesting. About a week, it was the next week after we went to see Green Day, which was my son's first rock show. I had also bought us tickets to go see NOFX's final tour. I saw them in Brockton, Massachusetts, in a small baseball stadium. It was a whole festival. I'm trying to remember who played in front of them, but they did a whole like, we're ending the band tour all around the world. And we were the last shows. They were in Massachusetts before they did the final stand in LA. I think they did 7 nights or 4, something. Did a whole thing. I think the Circle Jerks and the Dropkick Murphys were before them. It's very similar, same place, very similar thing to the Punk and Drublic Festival a while ago. Anyway, so I brought my son to the thing, and I was like, it's just so you know, I told him and his mother, I was like, this is going to be very inappropriate. And at one point, it was a NOFX show. If you've ever been to a NOFX show, they always seem like they're having an awful lot of fun up on stage, and they kind of don't take it too seriously. And they talk about not being that good, but the fact is, Fat Mike is a great songwriter. He spawned an entire genre that all play exactly like him, and he puts out all those albums too, because he's also a business genius. And it was really fun, because it really was just like any other NOFX show, but just with a little more, I don't know if urgency is the right word, I'm trying to think, but it was a little more weight to it. That was really kind of cool and fun and energetic. But at the end of the day, it was like the same group of people. Now, I don't know about folks out there listening, but I suspect Ron and I both think, yeah, right, you're never going to play again. Like,
in order to do the reunion tour, you need to break up. So that had to happen.
I get it. Yeah. But, let's just take it on the assumption that maybe they are done. Maybe they aren't going to play anymore. I wouldn't have wanted to miss it. I think that's the thing that, the band's still out there. It's really fun. And they're kind of right behind, they're like the more fun version of Fugazi. You know, it was the punk band.
Wait, whoa, whoa. What the fuck does that mean?
No, well, okay, like those. No, you're like there's like the party guy. Like Fugazi's a better band or whatever, but like they can be kind of serious. You know what I mean?
I don't know what universe that you put them in the same sentence.
Because they're both really successful punk bands who refused to join major labels and did it on their own and were way more successful than most of their peers.
On that level, yes, I guess.
Right, but they're very like the two bands have very different personalities. Is what I'm getting at.
Yes,
but I mean, who's after them? Who else is in that sphere where like they created?
Oh no, nobody. Yeah, that's it.
No one. That's and like both those bands got to make their own destinies and never had to rely on anybody to do it. Like never even considered the idea like that we needed MTV or we needed a major label. When that still meant as much as it did. That's very rare. That hasn't happened in terms of like becoming a thing, an entity that could, if it wanted to, go on indefinitely. Those are only two that I can think of. Anyway, really glad. If they play again, I will go. I'm not going to be mad about it. It's like pro wrestling. You're going to not expect it to do what you expect. And I was really glad to bring my son. We met former iFanboy writer Josh Christie there. Him and I go to punk shows in the Northeast together a lot. Great time. Good stuff.
Nice.
I was like, you got to see Keith Morris, who still sounds amazing.
Yeah, no, I saw Circle Jerks and Descendants together when they toured in September. That was a fun show, and that was a blast to see. I'd never seen Circle Jerks live. Mm-hmm. That was definitely checking that one off the box.
Greg Hetson.
Yes, who looks very old, but yes. Well, finally, to wrap this up, one of the similarly fantastic show moments for me was the Magnetic Fields got back together for the 25th anniversary of 69 Love Songs and played all 69 Love Songs over 2 nights in New York City, and was at Town Hall. Tickets were not cheap, but I was like, fuck it. My wife had never seen them. One of my friends had never seen them. And that record is just such a masterpiece. And I've seen Magnetic Fields play before, and I've seen them play songs of 69 Love Songs, but I've never seen all of them performed in a row in album order. And it was one of those, like, I don't know if they'll do this again. I don't know if I'll get the chance to do it again. So fuck it, I'm going to go. And I'm glad I did. It delivered on every possible level you could think of. It was entertaining. It was funny, with the exception of like one person who passed away. It was all the original performers on the album. Really, really, really fantastic. If you're not familiar with Magnetic Fields or 69 Love Songs, it is a collection of Stephen Merritt, the main songwriter, attempted to write love songs in every genre he could think of. There are punk songs, there are electronic songs, there are Busby Berkeley musical songs, there are marches, there are country songs. It is so delightful. And there's at least one song that each of you, Conor and Josh, could probably find like, oh, I love that song. That's pretty good, because it is so well done and showed what a true master songwriter can do by adapting any genre to fit a concept, which is just romance and love.
Nice.
All right, let's head over to podcasts. And we had a lot to talk about this year.
Yeah.
I'll start with TCM's been doing some terrific podcasts. We're going to talk about 2 of them during this segment. But the first is The Plot Thickens, Decoding John Ford, which is a terrific podcast that delved deeply into the life of John Ford and his career, who I think is easily the most influential American director of all time. He's also my favorite director of all time. He basically invented the language of modern cinema in his films, and very interesting guy. They have some rare interviews with him, interesting stories about his sets and what he did in that, how he terrorized them. He was not a great guy, but he was a great filmmaker. It's just a wonderful little documentary about John Ford in audio form. Plot Thickens is their series. This is their 3rd series. This was about John Ford. It was really good. Really, really good.
Strike Force 5 was the podcast that we talked about last year. Conor and I were enamored and in love with it, as was my wife and I. And after not having that anymore, after having that being over, I was like, what am I going to get for something like this? And I started listening to Family Trips with the Meyers Brothers, which they talked about it the entire time they did the show. And not once was I ever like, I should go check that out. But eventually I did. And my son is in a lot of these stories because I drive around a lot with him when we go skiing and stuff like that. And I was trying to find something to listen to. Now, he doesn't know who any of the celebrities are that are interviewed on Family Trips with the Meyers Brothers, but him and I started listening. We got through a whole lot of them. And every once in a while, like, see, I can show you who this guy is. And you go, oh, right. So what it is Seth Meyers and his brother Josh, who are from just up the road around here, have a celebrity guest on, and they talk about trips that they took with their families, often in their youth. It's interesting because many celebrity interviews are sort of these rambling things, but they put this very specific format around it. And Josh Meyers really likes to stick to it, which I love. He's their Conor. It's very interesting in that, like, Seth Meyers is a talk show host. We've seen him around forever. And this sort of part of him where he is with his brother, and they're kind of always talking about their childhood and their parents, and you get to know them, and you get to know his dad, Larry, and the stories, and it's very intimate in a way that you don't get out of a lot. I'm very over celebrity podcast interviews. I don't want to hear anymore, even if I find them interesting. I'm sick of it, but it's a neat way to do it. And listen, some of the guests are duds and some are not. Whenever they talk to the SNL people, it's fantastic. Your random celebrities, it's a crapshoot. The best ones, though, and you have to listen to it for a while, but the best ones are when they have their own mom and dad on. It's very funny. It's an interesting podcast that I wouldn't think would exist. And they do it like religiously. They're putting them out all the time.
I don't know how they all have time for this stuff.
That was why I said that. I was like, I don't know how you run a daily late night show that is on most of the time and still do this. And from what I can tell, Seth Meyers pretty involved with raising his small children, 3 of them. So I don't know. He's great. He's a very real person in that he's a cranky side and he knows it, but also they're both very funny and, whip smart. It's a really good show. I enjoy it. I'm glad I found it.
Well, Josh might be sick of celebrity interview shows, but I'm not. Talking Pictures, a Movie Memories podcast with Ben Mankiewicz, another TCM show, is an incredible interview show in which Ben Mankiewicz sits down with an actor, director, writer, and ostensibly it's a show about their memories of going to the movies and their favorite movies and their family's favorite movies and stories about that. But it also delves into their careers. It all interweaves how the movies they loved affect their careers. And then at the end, there's a standardized set of questions they answer that are all interesting. What's great about it is not just the conversations, which are great, but it's that he gets access to people that I've never heard do these kind of things, and so I learn about. So the first episode of season 2 this year was Bill Murray, which I've never heard on a conversation like this before. Granted, some of the audio is from his TCM appearances, but they had all original stuff from a sit down. I just listened yesterday to Margot Robbie, who I've never heard do press. I've just never seen an interview with her, and she was really interesting and really a bigger film nerd than I knew at all. Carol Burnett was fascinating this season. He did a lot of directors. Bill Hader's interview the year before was really funny, not just because he started doing an impression of Ben Mankiewicz's brother Josh. It's just a really interesting conversation with people who are very, very famous, but talking about their love of cinema and their love of the business with someone who they're very comfortable with. They give really interesting interviews and tell great anecdotes, and it's a really terrific podcast. Talking Pictures, a Movie Memories podcast.
Man, I want to check all those out. Love the movies. Well, speaking of movies, late to the game, and on the podcast side of things, I don't have much of a commute these days anymore. I've been working from home the majority of this year, so I'm not listening to podcasts as much as I had in the past. I do when I go running, but I've got the old standbys and the ones I've been listening to for years in my rotation, so it's hard to fit new ones in. But this summer I actually had the unique opportunity where I went on a very long road trip. I drove from New York to Indiana, and I needed stuff to listen to. I was caught up my podcast. I was looking for new stuff to do. And about a year ago, my cousin-in-law, my wife's cousin, brought me along to a live show of How Did This Get Made, which is the podcast by Paul Scheer, June Diane Raphael, and Jason Mantzoukas. And I knew the podcast existed. I knew it was Paul Scheer, Jason Mantzoukas, and June Diane Raphael talking about movies and, tearing down bad movies and celebrating good movies and things like that. But I never actually listened to the podcast. I went to the live recording of the show, and it was a blast. It was hysterical. I had a great time. Then 6 months later, I find myself in the car looking for something to listen to. I'm like, I'm going to check out some How Did This Get Made? And I think they do new episodes, but they also recycle episodes from, because they've been on forever like us.
Wait, you can do that?
They're just rerunning episodes from 15 years ago, right? And it's a blast. And it's probably a different tone than those TCM podcasts, Connor, but it is a love of movies and a love of cinema that drives it. And obviously a very amusing perspective on it, but it is just very funny. And I listened to a bunch in the car. And then since then, when I've had a gap in my regular podcast, I try to fill one in with another How Did This Get Made, mainly cherry picking the movies that I'm like, oh, I've seen that movie. I can relate to it or that sort of thing. It's
they can run on evergreen content all the time.
Yeah.
Our mistake was not doing evergreen shows.
It was going timely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, How Does It Get Made is very, very funny. All 3 of them are hysterical. Mantzoukas on the live show is very funny in the live setting. Very fast, very snappy. Guests are fun, from the comedy, Usual Suspects. I heard an episode of Ken Marino, so of course that was up my alley. Hanging out with friends, making fun of movies is a good time. Late to the game. I mean, I know I could be talking about this 15 years ago, but I finally got here.
Similarly, 2 Guys, 5 Rings, Matt Bowen and the Olympics by Matt Rogers and Bowen Yang. It was a very funny show that NBC created as a lead up to the Olympics. So you had Matt Rogers and Bowen Yang. Bowen Yang is well known, obviously, on SNL. Matt Rogers is his college roommate, comedian friend, also actor, performer, bringing their La Culturista's bravo energy to the Olympics. The show bled into the Olympics itself, but those shows weren't as good. The ones where they were anticipating the Olympics, trying to figure out storylines that they could relate to and characters that they could relate to, was very funny and entertaining. I just went full on Olympics mode for the Olympics and started, listening and watching everything I could. And this was one of my favorite things that I discovered during it, which led me to occasionally check out La Culturistas, which I hadn't before. And that's also a very funny show. This was great. It was a great little palate cleanser preparation for the Olympics, which I enjoyed.
I guess this next show, this would be a spin-off from Family Trips with the Meyers Brothers. There is a podcast, I don't know where I would have heard about, called Pretty Sure I Can Fly, with Johnny Knoxville and Elna Baker. Now, I'm sure most people listening know who Johnny Knoxville is. And if you are a This American Life fan, you might know who Elna Baker is. She did stories on it, but that wasn't her main job on the show. She's been on it forever. But I've known her for years because I listened to This American Life for years. And I thought, what do these people have in common? And it's a show called Pretty Sure I Can Fly, and they interview people who do extreme things. Obviously, Knoxville was on Jackass, and so they'll have on Travis Pastrana, famous dirt bike rider, like people who broke records on the X Games. But there's lots of other stuff people do. I haven't listened to all of them, but the reason that this is here right now is that I don't know if people know who Rodney Mullen is. Rodney Mullen was a freestyle skater in the 80s and, still skates today. He invented all the tricks. And when I say all the tricks, like every time you see a skateboarder flipping something around, doing a kickflip, heel flip, he's the first one to do any of them. People didn't even know you could do a kickflip before there was Rodney Mullen. And the other thing you may or may not know about Rodney Mullen is he's one of the most unique people ever. People will say, I don't know, he's very different. He's out of the norm. He might be on the spectrum. There's all sorts of things that people say, but when he speaks, he's really fascinating. And he came on and did that show and sort of talks about his life as a skater and is really, you don't have to be a skater to listen to this, but it helps to sort of have an idea about who he is. He just talked about his life growing up and his fascinating perspective on the world and his story. And to listen to him speak, to me, is a real treat. There was a Bones Brigade documentary, I don't know, sometime in the last 10 years or so. I think you can watch it on Amazon or something like that. And like when I say he invented all the skateboard tricks, he's not the person that you're thinking of. But he's also maybe, Tony Hawk would say he's the most amazing skater who ever lived. But I just found it to be incredibly inspiring. And like I walked away from him and was like, I think humans are better than I gave them credit for. I know I'm overselling that, but like it was a real moment for me listening to that whole thing. He's done like TED Talks and things like that. The Travis Pastrana show and other episodes that I've listened to have been a heck of a lot of fun. Also, he actually had Robert Smigel on once. And I guess the idea was you do some fucking crazy shit yourself, going out there and making fun of lunatics to their faces. So that was good. Great, interesting show. Lots of different guests.
So several years ago when I found myself with a commute that I wasn't used to having, a typical LA commute, I needed podcasts to listen to. And so I ended up discovering Gone South with Jed Lipinski. I'm pretty sure we've talked about this before in the show, but it started off as a show focusing on true crime stories from the South, dedicating one season for each story. So the first season was all about the Dixie Mafia or whatever that actually meant. But this new season, season 4, which I think I missed season 3 now that I look at it. I definitely listened to season 2, but I think I might have missed 3.
That was about the woman in Atlanta or Florida, and she got killed in the housing development kind of thing.
I definitely didn't hear that one. But season 4, they're going a different route, and they're doing an anthology format where they're doing one-offs or two-parters, which I know Josh doesn't like. But I think it's great because it allows them to tell stories that maybe don't necessarily fit a full season.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's not a full season worth of stuff to tell. And I've just been really enjoying these little slices of story. The most recent one was about this guy who moved to New Orleans and finds out there was this murder spree in the 80s that totally got forgotten about by the city, and he delves into that. There was a wonderful two-parter about the only man to escape Angola prison in Louisiana. I think he did it twice, and his life and how that ended up turning out. That was interesting. Oh, the best one was the one of the Buford Prusser episode, the guy who inspired Walking Tall. That was a two-parter, one of the famous American lawmen types who turns out may have actually been both corrupt and murdered his wife.
Spoiler.
Well, I mean, that's where it's going as soon as the show starts.
Yeah,
but
I know.
I just love these little dives into these little stories.
So you reached out and you were like, hey, are you listening? I've been listening to the show all along. I don't remember which one. You probably found it first, I think.
I did, yeah.
And you're like, oh, there's a new season. You should listen to this. And I was like, I got it queued up or whatever. And you said that, and I sort of fast-tracked it, and I started listening. And the first thing they say is, this season's a little different. We're going to, instead of doing a long form. And the thing is, I love long form investigative podcasts. They're my thing. I really enjoy that. And so I was set to be disappointed, but every single story was fascinating and riveting. There's a couple of 2-parters, and the good part is you don't feel like they go on too long.
Yeah.
I told my wife, I was like, you got to listen. And she went through all of them too. Like, it was a great, I don't know, what are they on, 8 or so? The 2 Buford Pusser ones, or what, like the last ones, I think.
No, the most recent one was the New Orleans one. It came out yesterday.
Yeah, really good. And a lot of these are people reading stuff off of, Wikipedia or whatever. Like, this is a reporter. He's a reporting.
He actually does interviews.
And he goes and talks to people who you do not get to hear from. There is an amazing story about someone that's 100 years ago. That's a lot like Walter White.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah, that was interesting. That was a 2-parter.
It
was really good.
Yep.
I like that show a lot.
What do you too?
I love how so many of these, especially podcasts, are like recommendations that are happening within this circle of us. And Josh, I'll give you credit that you recommended me the podcast Life of the Record. And I don't think you did it in reaction to the fact that I was going on that road trip, but you did it before I left on that road trip. So when I was looking for podcasts to listen to, I was like, oh, I remember Josh recommended something. And I checked out Life of the Record, which is basically a, kind of like an oral history of an album as told by the people who made it.
Yep.
They say in conversation with, but they've interviewed single people or persons who were involved in recording of an album. And obviously, they've done a bunch of episodes, and I cherry picked the albums that I cared about, right?
Sure.
I think the first one I listened to was the Postal Service Give Up, because we're here at the 20th anniversary of that, and listened to Ben Gibbard and Dintel, the Dintel guy. I forget
the guy in
his
the
name.
back.
Yeah, the other guy, the keyboard guy. I hear them talking about how they made Postal Service, and then I scroll down. I'm like, oh, look, there's Ian MacKay talking about At a Step, which was fascinating, as always, to listen to Ian talk for an hour. But so a whole bunch of records, listen to the Pixies, listen to the Sunny Day Real Estate one. Just really, really engaging to hear from the people who recorded
Steve Albini
these.
was on the Pixies one.
Yeah. So great to hear from the people who recorded the albums that we love, and it's a very well done podcast. So Life of the Record, if you want to go deeper into the music that you may love, if they did records. Connor, most recent record is a Tom Petty album, so that might be up your alley.
They're not just all like super indie. They're not. Did you listen to the Replacement Pleased to Meet Me one?
Not yet. I didn't get to that one.
Oh,
It's still
that's
in my
pretty
feed
good.
though. Yeah.
You know what? And I just like in a point of like production is that they talk to the guy who wrote the book, Bob Mayer. They talk to the son of the guy who produced and recorded the album because the kid was there the whole time. And then they found all of these recordings of Paul Westerberg contemporaneously, from around when the album came out. But they it was all edited together really seamlessly. It was a really nice bit of producing.
Yeah.
That
very
was
well
great.
done.
Yeah, really, and they're long. Like they're as long as they need to be, but they're quite a while. It's worth it.
I talked about this on our Media Explode show, but I think every good American citizen at one point or another goes into their JFK assassination wormhole phase for at least a little while.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the year, we had the Who Killed JFK podcast with Rob Reiner and Soledad O'Brien hosting. It was a nice warm blanket of returning to all of these names and things that I had a little bit of an obsession with in my 20s in college, and a little bit after.
You heard echoes.
I definitely heard echoes. Okay, so I don't know where I stand. My mind constantly changes on this. And I think this podcast has some very interesting things to say, some very interesting points, some very persuasive arguments. But what was really interesting was my wife does not give a shit about any of this. But I was like, you got to listen to this show. So after a couple of weeks of really bugging her about it, she finally did on her drives to and from work. She would sometimes pause the show and call me and talk about what she just heard. And then the beginning was a lot of like, this is a lot of conjecture and coincidence. And I was like, yeah, sure. But keep listening. And then she got to a point where she called me, she said, okay, that was disturbing, a little unsettling. And it was the point where the guy, robbed the bank so that he would be in jail on the 22nd, the guy from the CIA. Like, it was like something really crazy. Like, he was like, I got to be in jail for tomorrow. You got to put me in jail. And she was like, well, that's real weird. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot of real weird from here on out. And even though Rob Reiner is very strident in all of his opinions, I like him a lot. He is very sure in what he believes.
You can't tell me.
Right. It's like, well, maybe, but their conclusion I thought was compelling. I went a little rabbit hole reading after that. It was a little.
What is their conclusion?
It's
all right. So you can't spoil it. He's dead. We know that.
No, it's not about that. I don't want to end up dead. I don't want to end up having had a car accident or a heart attack.
You're repeating what they said in the phone. What is their
So theirs was the general guy. Oh, Josh, you remember his name?
I don't remember. In fact, without you saying it, now you're like basically CIA.
Not the Oliver Stone
right
thing.
Like rogue CIA elements, basically.
And military.
Yes. But like not, the military. It's just like the idea that the military and the CIA have operators, who are part of that for all these various reasons, had to take out Jack Kennedy. because thought he was the worst thing. But, they were still using CIA resources to do it and military resources to do it.
It's a famous general, and I can't think of his name. You'll know his name, and you've heard him in other things.
Bill Harvey?
This is not great conversation. I was not prepared to answer questions specific
I agree.
to the conspiracy, because I did listen to this 8 months ago.
Oh, Charles Willoughby. According to the podcast, was Charles Willoughby, a former major general in the U.S. Army who got involved with ultra-right and anti-communist groups.
That's right.
Yeah.
Anywho.
Here's the sad thing. I came to a realization.
His name popped up in Match of the Air when I was reading it this year. I was like, oh.
Oh, yeah, that's been. After watching yet another Zodiac docuseries, we're never going to find out the truth.
No.
Nope.
On this shit.
No.
It's just so mind-bending.
There was actually there was a point in this show where they kind of came to that conclusion too. Like all of the firsthand,
They're all dead.
They're all dead. There's a couple of people that they spoke to, and even like the Secret Service guy who sort of had that big revelation that like for some stupid ass reason he took the bullet and put it in his pocket.
Right.
Yeah.
Like none of that's provable, and the records aren't going to give you what you want. Like there is not a sheaf of records.
There's no file hidden away in the National Security Agency that says, here's who killed JFK. Like, it's just not a thing that exists. We're never going to know.
Yeah.
But it was compelling. And Ron, I recommend you listen to it.
Yeah,
It was a compelling
you really
show.
should.
It was a really good.
All right.
Make your kids listen. They got to start early.
You should.
And then move on to JFK. I showed my sister JFK when she was 4. She cursed a lot
Kids
for a
were
week,
different then.
and she forgot.
Did Megan watch JFK yet?
Oh, we were going to do it after. I think we didn't end up doing it, but we got to do it. Yeah. Then the next step is go to Dallas, because when you go to Dallas, it's freaky.
Right.
Oh, yeah. I just did Dallas, actually. Yeah.
I've been listening to Revisionist History for years, Malcolm Gladwell's podcast about things unexplained, whatever it is, I don't remember. I was starting to get over it. I was just like, all right, I've had enough. He sells a lot of shows. Like he'll do like a show about a thing, and it's like Chrysler will want him to talk about electric cars, and he'll do that. And I don't know, that bothers me for some reason.
So you just sponsored content.
Yeah, he does.
The
And he has to,
Spon-Con.
by the way. They had to lay a bunch, like, because there's some podcasts and they started this whole company up, Pushkin, and then they laid a bunch of people off because duh.
The bubble burst for a while, yeah.
Yeah, but there was I want to say 6-part series. Revisionist History kind of comes out in seasons. And there's always something interesting about them. But this one, Gladwell was sort of the co-host, but it was largely run by Ben Naddaff-Hafrey, and it was called Hitler's Olympics. And it was a look into the history of how the Berlin Olympics in 1936 came about and all the things around them and the people involved, and just like what the U.S. connections were to, why did we decide to go? What was sort of behind it? And who were these really interesting people who were in charge of the USOC? And like a really interesting look at what things were like and what the people in power found important at the time by focusing on people who had real personalities. And there's bits where there was that movie Run about Jesse Owens, which was probably not a very good movie.
It was fine. It was fine,
Right.
Whatever.
Well, like a lot of it is about one of the characters in that who's like portrayed as the great man of the Olympics. And it's his real story is much more interesting.
You mean the German guy?
Yes, there's a whole lot of it is about that. It isn't that though. It's one of the American USOC guys.
Oh, that guy. Yeah. I remember.
There's a big thing about the German guy and the legend of that story, which this is going to shock you, not at all true. There's a long episode about Jesse Owens and what his life was actually like after that, and why he tended to go along with this legend that was not really the truth. It was more of the legend. I think you'd really enjoy it, Connor. It was great listening. It was just sort of good history storytelling, and an area in history that like I didn't know about, but I didn't really know very much. But it's so fascinating. Like, why did we go to the Olympics in 1936? We knew who Hitler was at that point. That seems like a bad move.
NBC was committed.
Connor's like, I would have watched. I can't help it. I love the Olympics. It was great. It was really worth it. I'm glad. I think my wife said, you need to listen to this. Oh.
Let's move on to books. I had a weird, not great year for books, but there's still always things to talk about. Josh, why don't you start?
Sure. And just to get this out of the way, I didn't actually read most things. I did a lot of audiobooks because that's how I can. And I so many books this way, and it's my favorite thing because I love books. Those are my favorite. I love long form storytelling. I told you that. So I think we briefly touched on this in the Media Explode, but a new Neil Stephenson book came out. And if there's one author that iFanboy talks about, it's Neil Stephenson. If you're a listener, you're saying too much.
It's our platform.
You're probably right, and I don't care.
By the way, I'm like 45% through this book.
Oh,
right
good.
now.
Okay.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I made it through my first, because on the Amazon Kindle where it says how much time left in the chapter. And I was like reading along at a steady clip. And then I turned the page and it's like 1 hour, 20 minutes left in this chapter. I was like, Jesus Christ.
Long fucking chapters in this book. Yeah.
It's a benefit to audiobooks. It's just like, okay, this many hours left. I love when it's like 40 hours. I'm like, let's do this. Pole Stand Volume 1 of Bomb Light by Neil Stephenson is a much more grounded sort of real life history story that takes place in the early 30s, I believe. Is that correct?
Yep.
And basically, it's the making of a double agent, a Russian or Soviet double agent. I don't really know where it's going to go, but the female protagonist is this really interesting character that we meet as a teenager. And, the story is taking place in the past in America and in the present being the 30s, in the Soviet Union. And I'm all in. Has the Neil Stephenson overwriting and overexamination of situations and people, but it actually feels much more subdued to me. There's action elements to it, but it's also kind of personal. It reminds me a little bit of like if Neil Stephenson had written The Americans, but like the super prequel to The Americans. A lot of time is spent at the Chicago World's Fair.
Yep.
In the World Exposition. I really enjoyed it. I was very upset. I got to the end and I was like, oh man, I'm not going to get to read this next part for a long time. And I was I was very aware, like halfway through, I was like, I would like to keep going. And this is not going to be enough.
Right. That's the weird thing with this book. It's not a full book.
Yeah. But that's, whatever. Get it out there. Are you enjoying it, Ron?
Yeah, no, it's great. It's fantastic. I had a flight earlier this week and I got some time on the plane to read, which is one of my favorite places to read. And I jammed through it. And it's the kind of thing where you just keep going. You just keep page turning. And that's what Stevenson's so good at, right?
When I used to really read was like when I was in an office and I would go out to lunch. I used to love to do that. That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
We don't have lunch anymore. Remember the old days before the pandemic when we had lunch?
So much fun. A very hotly anticipated book amongst the three of us, in addition to Neil Stephenson, but also we enjoyed the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. And so with the Expanse coming to an end, was delighted to hear that they were starting up a new series of books. And the first book that came out was called The Mercy of God. So as soon as that came out, I'm pretty sure the day it came out, the day it hit my Kindle app, I started reading it. And I was all excited because I just love The Expanse. And I love that first book of The Expanse because it pulls you in. It like introduces you to the whole world and gets you going right out of the gate. And Mercy of Gods was a lot of setup. Was much slower pace.
Good half the book of why are we doing this?
Yeah, I was going to say the first third of the book, I'm pretty sure I described to you guys as, this is a real slog.
Yep.
Now, that said, I stuck with it and got to the end of the book and it picks up steam and it puts the pieces on the board. And as soon as I realized what the world that we were in and what this story was going to be, then I started looking for the pieces that I could grab onto. And it did grab me by the end of the book. And now I can't wait for the next book to see where it goes. Very different from The Expanse. And whereas The Expanse was a potential future of ours, and it hinged around Earth's expansion to Mars, to Saturn's moon belts, right? And had ties back to Earth, things like that. This is completely alien. This is planet, people, names, alien species, words that are just made up and nonsense. And I realized that's the kind of science fiction that I don't really love as much. Right. Because I do like having some connection to what I know. It does feel familiar. They are humans and they are scientists and things like that.
I feel like it could be our world easy enough.
It's not. Until they say it is, it's not, right? And so,
I know it isn't, but I'm saying it's just it's a stand-in for it. It's like an alternate timeline kind of thing. But the world that they come from isn't so different. And everything else is sort of hard sci-fi.
I have very little patience for made-up words and for like when you put lots of consonants together and then, like stuff like that.
As opposed to The Expanse, which had
at least it was a little more, little names were a little more.
This is grounded.
Naomi, James, that sort of, but regardless, by the end of this book, this got me and I'm in and I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, I agree.
My wife's in a women's sci-fi book club. They meet once a month and they talk about a sci-fi book. And the last book they did, which she said I had to read when she was done, was called The Ministry of Time, a novel by Colleen Bradley. And the premise is that the English government has discovered time travel. But before they start mucking around in time, they want to test it, make sure people can survive the journey. So they go back in time and grab people from the past right as they're about to die. So taking them won't affect the timeline. And then they bring them to the present and they give them a minder or a handler and try to integrate them to society, see how it works, see if people can survive, see if mentally they can do it, all this stuff. The main guy is actually a real person from history, from an English expedition that everybody perished on the ice shelf. But it annoyed me because this was a story idea I've had for years, just like bringing people back from the past into the future. This is one of those things you write in your head while you're sitting in traffic. So I was annoyed that somebody actually did it. But really interesting. Not at all what you'd expect. It's more of a kind of a romance than anything else. There's certainly action elements. Certainly there's adventure. But it's mostly about the romance between one of the time travelers and the Minder. Really interesting and thoughtful. The premise I gave you is the premise you're given in the beginning, but you find out later a lot of it is not what you think is going on. And it was actually really fun. If you like time travel stuff more in the vein, Josh, of like a time traveler's wife than a hard sci-fi story, this is that kind of story.
I'm adding it right now.
Yeah.
I'm literally going to get this on here. I don't want to forget. Yeah, because you had me instantly.
Yeah.
Erik Larson is my favorite history writer, author of Devil in the White City and many other wonderful books, in the Garden of Beasts. There was a new book that came out this year from Erik Larson.
I was going to be really impressed you read it all this week.
Yeah, no, it's pretty good. The Demon of Unrest, a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. And this is basically about the period just before the Civil War, largely focusing on what's happening in Charleston, where Fort Sumter is, and the people who are in Fort Sumter and the people who are in Charleston. And it's a very myopic look at what that was like just at that time. And also a real look into the Southern character and what is kind of described as like they all lived by a kind of, all right, I just generalized a lot, but he described a great deal of people, especially people who you'd think, wealthier people in sort of the ruling class. They really subscribed to a chivalric code that was sort of cribbed from, romantic British novels. And they thought they were like British gentry.
Well, all the rich people back then, that's where they were taking their cues from England.
Honor and this sort of non-existent worldview. And like how much of this was that their honor was at stake. And that's why they had to fight back, which, I understood in abstract without really having it defined or put together. Erik Larson I don't know how you do it. I don't understand how you can, from what exists now, really nail down a full picture of a person as a genuine human being. He's very good at that. I think it's one of the reasons I really like his books is that he managed to sort of tease out, he's supposing a lot, but it's really well done. He focuses largely on, and I don't remember his name, but basically the guy who's in charge of Fort Sumter and sort of everything that those guys went through. And, that dude wasn't really all about abolition. He was pretty against it. You hear a lot about Abner Doubleday, guys, you like baseball.
He didn't invent shit.
You don't want to get into this. Come on.
No, I don't even mean it that way.
This podcast is already long enough.
But he was a pretty impressive dude, at least in this period of history. Just the author turns over all these stones and, tells me a little bit about an extremely relevant piece of American history that I didn't know a lot about.
He's a great writer.
He's a
great researcher.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a lot of
or
it.
His team or whoever he is on that. It's
right.
Good.
Yeah. And he definitely, it's like you go through the acknowledgments and everything. He definitely has help. Another great book. The one on the Lusitania, Dead Wake, that one's fantastic. Just extra one there.
All right. Thank you for that. On my side, part of our Gift of the Magi gift exchange last year, Conor and I both got each other the same book, The Path to Paradise, a Francis Ford Coppola story by writer Sam Wasson. Read it earlier this year, knowing that Megalopolis was coming. Right. And I'm glad that I did. We didn't talk about Megalopolis in the movie section, but I thought that was an experience in and of itself. And Coppola is one of those filmmakers and directors who, obviously, his resume speaks for himself, with Apocalypse Now and The Godfather, but like massive failures and flops and just a crazy kind of career arc, from trying to rebel against the Hollywood studio system in the 60s and moving it up to San Francisco to working within the Hollywood studio system to trying to do it better and failing and all this sort of stuff. And I thought this was a really great portrait of a person and a obsessive artist, basically, and kind of filled in some of the gaps of what I knew about Coppola and his history and his background and some of his motivations. And I thought it was a great primer before diving into the film Megalopolis.
It made it all so much more interesting to know.
It really did,
yeah. It was a really good book. It wasn't like quite as searingly interesting as his Chinatown book, but I thought it was a fascinating look at basically a troubled genius.
Agreed.
Yeah. Similarly, Oscar Wars, A History of Hollywood in Gold, Sweat, and Tears by Michael Schulman was not exactly what I thought it was going to be, but it was still incredibly interesting. So I thought it was going to be much more of a deep dive into the Oscars, as the title suggests. And it is in a way, but it's also very much using the Oscars to tell the history of Hollywood, which I know very well. So a lot of things weren't new, but there were certain times in which he went deeper into the Oscars than others. Certainly the beginning, the formation of it, which was a very interesting story. And there's an incredibly good long segment on the 90s focusing mostly on the battle between Miramax and DreamWorks over Shakespeare in Love and Saving Private Ryan, that whole campaign and how that changed the Oscars forever and
it was
everything.
so fascinating. Yeah,
that was the best part of the book. The book was really good, but that was the best part of the book. Really the deep dive into how that all went down.
Yeah.
It's a big book, but I thought it was good. I thought it was going to be much more about like straightforward, like Oscar history, but the stories that they told and how the Oscars nearly killed that one guy who came on that one year and as a creative director and nearly drove it into the ground. That was the Snow White year. That was
the guy who did Grease too.
Yeah, that was interesting.
If you love movies, and I've watched the Oscars since I was a kid and all this stuff, it was a behind the scenes of awards and the crazy stuff that people did or approaches or just, kind of, and I thought this is great as a kind of accompaniment to the Hollywood oral history book that we read last year, because it kind of focused on some of the infighting and professional drama that existed within the industry at various points in time, whether it was the Blacklist era or, I thought that whole section of this book was fascinating, right? Yeah, it was just a lot of fun.
I love the idea of something that's an institution in society, but if you go back to its formation, it almost could never have happened and or happen totally differently. So the actual formation of the Oscars, how they came to be, why they came to be, who was involved, it could have gone so differently in so many ways. It could have died very quickly on the vine. Like all these things could have happened. Really interesting story if you're into that. It's really a great book.
I'm trying to get through as many Dennis Lehane books as I can. It's one of those names that I knew. And then I actually, he'd been on The Wire and, written, Mystic River and whatever. And I finally got to a Dennis Lehane book. It was like, oh, where have you been all my life? And I went through The Given Day and those 3 books or whatever. And I just sort of picked up a random book that I didn't even know what it was. Since We Fell, a novel by Dennis Lehane. I think it was out in 2017. So this isn't new per se. And I had no idea what it was. And you can only do that really unless somebody you really trust says, just read this. Or it's an author who you really, we were just talking about Mercy of the Gods, James S. A. Corey. Do you stick with that book if it isn't an author who has really delighted you in the past? Probably not. And so I struggled to even explain this. So basically we meet this girl and her mother's awful. She doesn't know who her dad is and her mother dies. And we kind of are with her as she grows up and she becomes a reporter and she marries a guy and she finds somebody who might be her dad. And I'm about halfway through the book. I'm like, what is the story here? I genuinely was like, I don't know what it is. And I actually really hesitate. But basically, she has a relationship with this person and things aren't what they seem.
He's a good writer. He's a very good crime
He's an incredibly good writer. Yeah. The books often take place in Boston. And I knew where they were at every point in the book in a way. And it took place in New England, in a contemporary time frame. I was like, how do you even think of this story? It turns out to be a crime book, but it's a very unconventional crime book. I could see it being made into a very lackluster movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, that happens a lot with his books.
Yeah.
Fortunately.
The genius of these things is in the subtlety of the writing, and it's very hard to convey that. It's not a hard-bitten crime story like you're used to. It's a very different thing, but it's small, it's personal, it's a human story. It's a pretty quick read, and if you've liked Dennis Lehane and you skipped on this one, get to it. Yeah, it doesn't particularly, if I read it, I wouldn't be like, oh, this is just like Mystic River or Any Given Day or, whichever else. But it was a surprise. It was a real, sort of a delightful little, I didn't know what I was getting into, and it's great.
I read a bunch of personal memoirs this year, including Henry Winkler's book and some other ones. But Kathleen Hanna from the band Bikini Kill and La Tigra and Julie Ruin, she wrote her own memoir called Rebel Girl, which came out this past year. And again, we talked earlier in the music section about the importance of Steve Albini. It is hard to underscore the importance of Kathleen Hanna in the underground music kind of world, from being at the origin point, for better or for worse, of Riot Girl to, her friendship and relationships with Kurt Cobain and all of Nirvana. Kathleen Hanna's the one who wrote Kurt Smells Like Teen Spirit on his wall, which led to him naming the song Smells Like Teen Spirit, up to the point of her, dating and eventually marrying Mike D from the Beastie Boys. She has been at an important point in music's history throughout the late 80s and 90s into the 2000s, and has just been a strong proponent for change, a strong proponent for inclusivity, and just really just kind of we talk a lot about Ian MacKaye and Fugazi and DC and all this stuff. She was, she lived in DC for years, and after seeing Bikini Kill, Ian walked up to her her and offered to produce them and she didn't know who he was. Like, she's just been at every point of importance, it seems like, right? And she's one of the people who I think should be held up in the higher levels of folks who showed up and were meaningful and changed and made things happen and continues to now. I mean, and so reading her memoir and understanding where she came from and her journey to where she got to today and approach to music and approach to touring and approach to the industry and all this sort of stuff is just really, really fascinating and a unique perspective. And glad that she sat down and wrote this, because it's good to, have that perspective be documented and shared with everybody. So if you're into music, if you're into underground stuff, if you're into Bikini Kill, the Tigro, that sort of stuff, you probably already read Rebel Girl, but if not, check it out by Kathleen Hanna.
If Neil Stephenson's my favorite fiction author, Richard Osman's my second favorite. He of the Thursday Murder Club series, soon to be a major made-for-TV movie from Netflix. He's written 4 of those Thursday Murder Club books, so this is his first book that is not involving those characters or that world, although you reveal at the end it takes place in the same world. Crossover. We Solve Murders features all the things that Richard Osman fans love about him, and I know like 5 people who read these novels and love them, are ravenous for them. He's funny, he's charming, the characters are sweet British people who found themselves caught up in murder investigations. There's always someone who's very badass at action and adventure who helps these sweet people solve murders. Just a really nice story. This one ends up being about a daughter who's a professional bodyguard, her retired homicide cop dad, and a Danielle Steele-esque famous rich novelist. They all come together to solve a murder. Really delightful. Not as great as the Thursday Murder Club stuff because those characters are so wonderful, but still really enjoyable and fun. And I look forward to more of these as he wants to mix it up and tell different kind of stories. I really enjoyed that.
It's a weird little book that I don't remember how I came across it, called The Butchering Art, Joseph Lister's Quest to Transform the Grisly World of Victorian Medicine by Lindsay Fitzharris. This is a history of...
Should we be concerned?
No, it's a history of like antisepsis. It's the idea of... Okay, you guys never really watched The Nick, which is a huge crime.
I watched the first episode.
Yeah, that's not enough of it.
I think I watched the first one too, yeah.
It's so weird. I loved it so much.
It was fine.
I gotta move on. Basically, it's Victorian medicine. So they talk about sort of the history of where
germs,
medicine, where doctors were and surgeons, what they thought in a world before we had antiseptic devices, like science. And it focuses on a guy named Joseph Lister, whose name you might think of, Listerine. And that is related, who sort of fought against all of the standing wisdom that was completely wrong, that you needed to clean your medical equipment so that people weren't infected and died. They had no idea. It always terrifies me about science and history. Like, not that long ago, we didn't know shit. And so it's easy for me to go, maybe we don't know shit now. If you think about how many times what people have thought is good and or bad for you in terms of food has changed during our lives, why would you trust anybody? Although we have more proof now than we used to. They didn't see a lot of things. It starts off with really fantastic stories of like what surgeons were like back then, and how they had to do things that really quick. And, the story is that, most people didn't die in surgery, which was excruciating because they had nothing to anesthetize you, but then they would die afterwards. Very often because they would be infected.
Are you saying that biting down on a stick wasn't enough?
It was not. Or a little bit of liquor.
Yeah.
So, this guy, Joseph Lister, had a really interesting family life. He was a Quaker and he was in England, and his family was really supportive and interesting in a way that they let him do this thing. And he just fought forever to be like, I think there's really something to this. And no one really believed him for most of his life. And then when he started to prove that carbolic acid was the first thing that they really used to like clean the instruments, and then that would change things. But then like the world went crazy selling stuff with carbolic acid in it that didn't work or do anything at all, and Listerine, it's just named after him, had nothing to do with him. They stole his name. They put it on the thing and sold tons of it because he was very famous for a while.
That's the American way.
British, but then American. It was both.
To become the American way.
Victorian, as we change from an older world into a world based in science, just the same thing, Connor. You probably read books about like, forensics. How like nobody believed it. Then at some point we're like, no, we think there's something to this. This is very similar to that.
We all have fingerprints.
Yeah, because we go from the dark age into a world of more science as we take those steps, and the people who start to figure out things logically, and literally nobody believes them. There's all these essays and like letters in medical journals about how he's completely out of his mind. That there's such a thing as germs. Really interesting little history story.
We'll talk about history, and along with things that we lost this year. Unfortunately, the legendary storied venue in Brooklyn, in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, St. Vitus, got shut down earlier this year and then never opened their doors again after, 12 plus years of being around. It happened to coincide with the fact that they finally shipped the Kickstarter book, St. Vitus Bar, The First 10 Years in Oral History. And the shipping of this book basically became a eulogy, as it were, for the club. And, they did a beautiful job on this coffee table book, capturing the photos and telling the stories of the amazing shows that happened at St. Vitus. And I'm glad that I actually, chipped in for the Kickstarter when it came out years ago, because I wanted to support my friends at this club that I loved. And I'm glad that I got it, because now I've got all these memories of shows that I was at and stories from folks who were there and a lot of the musicians who played there and things like that.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, it was a great idea, and they didn't intend it to be a eulogy, as it were.
It's the first 10 years implies there's more.
Yeah, exactly. So unfortunately, we were not going to get another 10 years out of it, but it's a great idea to capture this. And they did such a beautiful job on it, and it's a real keepsake. And I'm sure there are copies out there if you wanted to track it down, but some, awesome photos of some amazing musicians and bands.
What happened? Like, what was the story of, like, why did it shut down?
It's not for the podcast. I'll tell you offline. But
okay.
Basically somebody called in the lack of permits and the city shut them down. And then it took so long they couldn't keep it closed. And the work that it would take to get it up to code, they're like, we're going to bail.
Okay.
Which sucks because they survived the pandemic.
Right.
It was such a 1-2 punch, right? Like, we'd already gone through the Save St. Vitus phase in 2020 when we were chipping in to pay the bartenders and all this stuff, even though they weren't working. Mm-hmm. And just I don't think they wanted to do that again.
I get that.
But yeah, the book is beautiful and it's awesome. Josh, next time you come over, I'll show it to you. There's just some great photos of awesome shows. And it is fun to flip through a book and be like, oh, I was at that show. That's a fun little thing.
I always think of, that's the place, I mean, this is probably not everybody's most famous show, but after the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, I think of Nirvana. They played a bunch of shows there.
Yeah, at 3 a.m.
Right, but there's this grainy, incomplete footage of Jay Mascis playing and singing with Nirvana. And they played Breed and School, and I was like, "That's amazing. He could be in that band, And I just and then St. Vincent played with them, and Joan Jett. I just always think of that.
Carrie Brownstein, and that was legendary night. I was not there, but my friends were there.
That's a good
Theater
one.
Kids: A True Tale of Off Broadway by John DeVore. Now, Josh and I met John in 2008. Cute Josh saying, "What?"
I thought it.
So in 2008, we did a lot of press, the three of us, on radio shows about superhero movies. Mostly it was all call-in stuff. The one and only time we ever went into the studio to do it live, Josh and I went into the...
Sirius or XM? There were two different ones.
It was before the merger, I think. The offices, and did a Maxim radio show called DeVore and Diana.
Yep. Okay. I remember
John
that.
was the co-host with Diana Falzone. We became friendly with both of them eventually. Through that, I became friendly with John. Like, they invited me to their We Just Got Canceled party. So I went to that, and then I used to run into him regularly at like comic stuff because he was a comic guy. So like at San Diego or New York Comic Con, and we'd chat, and we were Twitter and Instagram buddies, and we would message each other as appropriate. So he put out this memoir called Theater Kids, where he in the 2000s came to New York from Texas to be in Broadway. He was a theater kid in high school, but he was also a raging alcoholic. And this was the year where he got cast in this underground black box play in Brooklyn that his friend was directing, and also dealing with pretty severe addiction issues. And so this becomes a memoir not only of putting on this wacky show, but also trying to come to grips with his problems. And I was very proud of him for writing. This is a hard thing to write about yourself, and it was a very shocking at times, but he's unforgiving about his behavior back then. And really great memoir. It's short. It's about 200 pages, equal parts the thrill and the fun of New York in that 2000s period, which was when we were just out of college as well. And, I missed terribly, but also a hard look at himself at the time as someone who had some serious problems that he had dealt with. Really compelling. And I think if you're an actor or know an actor or a performer, it's a really interesting look at the creative process and the mindset of someone who really just wants to make a living being creative, and it's hard to do. It's a brutal business.
And it's worse now.
Yeah.
All right. So in a sort of full circle moment, you may remember that I said when I watched Shōgun, I was like, oh, this is great. And then I watched it again. This is great. So I guess you can probably imagine that what I did next was get that Shōgun, A Novel of Japan book going by James Clavell, the thing that started it all off.
It's a big book.
It is. In audiobook form, it is in 2 parts. I think they're each 20-something hours. And when you read a book and you're into it and like you're not even thinking about it ending because you're just like, I can just be here in this thing. Like books all have ends. And I think episodic TV is like this. You're like, well, this story can just go on sort of indefinitely with these people for a really long time. And that is what it felt like to read Shōgun.
Well, you're lucky. He wrote like 6 more books.
Yeah, they're cute. Like, I'm good. From what I understand, though, like, he never quite bested this.
Sure, that's his classic. Yeah, it's his Lonesome Dove.
Yeah. So having watched the show, I did this too. I did this when Game of Thrones came out. I watched that first season, I think 5 times. And I was reading the books at the whole time. And when you do that, you tend to get to know the characters, because this is shocking, but books have a little more detail on the characters than TV shows have time for.
More inner life.
It helped me appreciate the story of the show a little more. And it is a little different, not necessarily in plot. The plot's pretty straight on, but like the relationship between John Blackthorne and Anna Sawai, or what I know her name, I just can't think of it, is different. In the show, I don't know if it's will they, won't they.
It's restrained.
It's very restrained, though. Like, you're not sure if there's anything there. And in the book, there's there. It's a thing. But you also get a much more of a view of her inner life and the idea of sort of how this culture works and how people think about things. And there's things in the show where you watch and how could you so easily, commit seppuku for your, they talk a lot about that. And it comes to be something you kind of understand. Now, as I was reading, this was happening to me, and I think that this happens with this book a lot, is that it's very easy to go, this is what it was like. This is fascinating. And then you have to remember, like, this is a British guy in the 60s romanticizing a place from his point of view. And so you want to take it as gospel, because at the same time, you'll be like, I've learned all of this stuff about Japanese culture and history. And it's like, well, not exactly. But that said, there's enough there that is based in reality. It's certainly well-intentioned to a certain extent. And it's just incredibly compelling. I never thought, this book's 50 years old. There was none of that. Just a really engaging, fun story about a different place. I think the characters had a lot more. None of it worked antagonistically towards the show. Like, nothing in it took away from something that's in the show. All of the stuff in the book is in the show. You just don't see it all. You don't know it all. Like, it did not contradict itself for the most part. So it's, if you liked that show and you have time, you should read the book. It'll give you something.
I got my grandmother's copy. We cleaned out her apartment, and I made sure I grabbed her Shōgun. So I've got her falling apart paperback version, which I'm looking forward to reading.
It's absolutely worth it. It was a page turner. It was super compelling. Couldn't stop. Couldn't get through it fast enough.
I love superhero novels. I always have. I have a whole stack of them, of Batman novels and Superman novels, and I love them. I even have the Queen of Country novels that Greg Rucka did. If there's a superhero adaptation on novel form, I will try to check it out. So this year I was reading Marvel editor Tom Brevoort's blog where he was talking about Christopher Priest, and he linked out the Christopher Priest blog. So I clicked over to that, Christopher Priest being a writer. And in that blog post, he talked about how he was so disillusioned with comics. And the last really satisfying job he had in comics was when he wrote these Green Lantern novels in the early 2000s, this trilogy. And I was like, what? So I found them on eBay or something because they're way out of print. And I read this year Green Lantern Sleepers, book 1. The book series is called Green Lantern Sleepers, and there's 3 books by Christopher Priest. This one came out in 2004. I really enjoyed it, even though the main character was Kyle Rayner. What I loved about it was that it was set in the present day for Kyle, which put him in the early 2000s. Alan Scott is a character, he's Jade, his girlfriend's father, but he's also a character in flashbacks to the 40s. And so they put Hal Jordan in the 70s as that's his prime time. So Hal and Dinah and Ollie are all in their prime in the 70s. And so there's this fun triple period piece going. But then Hal and Dinah and Ollie are still around in the present day. They're just in their late 40s. He gets to play with time in a way they don't get to do in comics, right? And make it realistic in the way readers want it to be, but it could never be. Really fun that way. But it was a really fun story. I'm looking forward to the other 2. I've got them all. The first cover is Kyle. The second cover, I think, is Hal. The third one is Alan, or maybe switched. But I assume we're all going to get different points of view. But I really enjoyed them, and I'm looking forward to reading more of them. I really was happy I fell upon this random trilogy of superhero novels I never knew about. So there you go.
Who knew?
Who knew?
I was like, who would have thought? And you said who knew first.
So those are the books we read this year. And now we're going to end the show, as we always do, talking about just a few of the favorite comics that Josh and I read this year. We're going to go very quickly through them because we talk about it every week in the Pick of the Week show. We wanted to highlight just some of our favorites. Again, just some of our favorites. Can't say it enough. Just some of our favorites. There are other favorites. These are just some of them.
There's no order.
No order.
If you want more, we do this show.
Other than the first one, which we agreed is the best, or at least was one of the best books this year. But yes.
You see, it wasn't. You can't even do it.
Go ahead, Josh.
You can't even do it. All right, so the first book on here, and it was a no-brainer, was Amazing Spider-Man. Zeb Wells has been writing this for quite some time. John Romita Jr. and Ed McGuinness did probably the bulk of the art, and there was other artists who went through there because it comes
Patrick
out.
Gleason, other people.
It came out bi-weekly, I think. Christ, it might even be weekly at this point. It was the long-form, never-ending soap opera comic book that I used to think of as Marvel. There were storylines that were consistent, went through the whole thing. They weren't all the same, but they all led into each other. So as we started off, Sin Eater, and the takeaway from that is that Norman Osborn had all of his sin removed, and then he was able to be a good guy, which he was for a very long time in the book. And then a Ben Reilly story pops up. And, this is just over the last few years, but how many times was Amazing Spider-Man Pick of the Week?
This year, 4.
4 times. Amazing Spider. Like, we've been doing this show forever. There's never been a time where we were so into a single run of Amazing Spider-Man. Amazing Spider-Man needs to be the good Spider-Man. That's just the way it is. And it's just giving you exactly what you want all the time. And not every issue is like, this is amazing. But as a sort of ongoing concern, every time an issue came out, there was something fun out of it. Good old superheroes, good old Marvel superhero. Just a treat for old comic book readers, I think, for at least Connor and I.
Batman and Robin Year One may have had only 2 issues of the 12 out, but it is the best Batman book in like a decade. It is the Batman book we've all been wanting and waiting for. It's from Mark Waid and Chris Samnee. It's a flashback to when Robin's first year as a member of the team. And it is exactly the tone you want. It is exactly the Batman you want. He's got his family. He's happy. They have adventures. It's serious, but it's still fun. His world isn't constantly collapsing around him. He has his fortune and his company, and Alfred's alive, and Police Commissioner Gordon's there. It is the Batman that I have not had in feels like 10 years, and I could not be happier. I'm sad it's only 12 issues. I'd like it to go forever. If I was an eccentric billionaire, I would pay them to do this book forever. I love it so much.
Grommets, written by Rick Remender and Brian Posehn. Do you
Correct.
remember the artist's name?
Brett Parsons.
This is a story ostensibly about Rick and Brian Posehn.
Ron, you'd love this book.
Yeah. In the 80s as kids.
The fictionalized friendship between Rick Remender and Brian Posehn in the 80s Sacramento area.
Yeah, as sort of young skateboard nerd kids, living that teenage life in a place where everything is a little scary and a little exciting. It feels like walking through a mall from the 80s. That's what it feels like to read this book. If you could go and be in a mall in the 80s and there's an Orange Julius and everything is brownish or orangish, it feels like that. And it is so, I can't even describe this. There's a visceral feeling of nostalgia, and not the nostalgia of I loved Spider-Man when I was a kid, that different kind, like a feeling of, this was what the world was like.
Right.
And the way that people talk to each other and the way that things were in ways that you don't realize are different until somebody points them out. And you're like, oh, people are different.
Yeah, this book has been on my radar for sure. I definitely want to pick it up when it goes in trade. But the way you're describing it reminds me there's an episode of Bluey where the dad tells the kids a story about when he was a kid in the 80s. And it's all and they do a very good job of saying how different the world was between the 80s and now. It's very funny.
Just everything smelled like cigarettes.
Yep. Yes.
And Brett Parsons,
amazing cartoon,
the man for the job. Just the right amount of cartoony, but can do emotional acting. It feels like it was so hard to be a kid back then,
but also not.
True, in different ways.
A lot of freedom.
You leave it, skateboard and come back 6 hours later.
Like an emotionally unmoored. You had to navigate the world on your own, and it was a scary thing a lot of times and exciting a lot of times. Great book.
This was the year of G.I. Joe as the G.I. Joe license went over to Skybound at Image, and they've been putting out a whole new series of books intertwined with their Transformers line, but also still publishing, still going. G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, the series that started it all. We're in the 300s now. Larry Hama is still writing it. The great joy of this book, amongst many things, is that Josh and I are back in it, but having missed a good 100 issues, if not more. And so trying to figure out what the fuck is going on and why Serpentor is now Serpentor Khan and why there are zombies, but loving all of the incredible over-the-top nonsense that makes G.I. Joe the best has been a treat every month now that it's back. And I'm glad Larry Hama's got an income stream. I'm glad they have great artists in the book. And I'm glad it's incredibly fun. Even though half the time I'm like, why is anything happening? Snake Eyes shouldn't be talking. Yeah. All of it.
None of it matters. And this little part of me is like, does Larry Hama want to quit? And he can't. And a little other part of me is like, yeah, I'd like him to keep, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
Keep him at the desk. Anything that remains in his head is a waste. So get it all out.
Yeah.
So it's very easy and it's very fun for us to be like, oh, this old G.I. Joe book that's going on is still great. But perhaps even more impressive is the fact that basically all of this stuff has been rebooted by Skybound, Robert Kirkman's imprint. Void Rivals and Transformers have been going on since before this year. But of the G.I. Joe books, Scarlet, a book that I would not expect to be the standout, written by Kelly Thompson with art by Marco Ferrari.
2 picks of the week out of 5 issues.
Right. Just a really good comic book about a G.I. Joe character with ninjas and like really modern,
and tiki
fresh feeling art, a different take on these characters. This Scarlet isn't exactly the same. It is the same in spirit, but the story and the circumstances around how she lives are different. Jinx is a main character here. Storm Shadow's in this book. The Urashikage ninjas are in this, and they're sort of discovering Cobra just like everybody else in this universe is. Yeah, it's an action book. It's about, fighting and
heists,
spy shit, but like Mission Impossible spy shit, as opposed to the real boring spies, slow horses spies, that kind of thing, where they're just normal schlubby people. These are really impressive people.
These are sexy ninjas. That's what it should say on the cover. Sexy ninjas.
Sexy ninjas. Kelly, for me, especially you two, really the sexiness quotient of something is what's going to put you over the edge.
Absolutely. This year is proving that for sure.
Yeah. Kelly Thompson continues to be a joy. Just all sorts of great different stories coming out of her. Yeah. It's good.
This year saw the end of one of our favorite books from Rainbow Rowell and Andrea Genellet, The Sensational She-Hulk. They had a terrific run on this series through 2 series. It went for several years, but not long enough because it was one of the best books Marvel was publishing. Of course, it wasn't popular. It was basically a romance comic, but it was one of our favorites. It always was on our top 10 list. On this show, it was always in our end of the year stats top books list. It was just one of our favorite comics. And, that is the plight of She-Hulk. She comes along, she gets a book for a little while by some top creators, and it goes away because no one reads it. But it's fine. It's comics for you. It breaks your heart.
I could almost say the same thing about the Fantastic Four that I said about Amazing Spider-Man, except I think it's possible that it's been even longer since we've had. No, that's not true.
No,
I was going to say that Dan Slott Fantastic Four was great, and we thought, what else could be? We thought,
who's the poor sucker is going to go after Dan Slott's incredible run, and then Ryan North says, "I'll take that job."
So we're a couple years into this now.
Yep.
How many times was it pick of the week? At least twice.
This year twice, but last year won most picks.
Right. Every time that there's a new issue, I think, how many more thoughts can this Ryan North bastard have? How many more original, exciting, never before thought of, and incredibly well plotted and characterized stories are we going to get out of this? And there are overarching arcs, but each issue, and every once in a while 2 issues, is its own story. Even the things that were wrapped up in Blood Hunt and the big vampire story, which is a death knell for arcs like these, were fantastic.
Right.
It's really fantastic. I did it again. I use that word a lot, actually, just in my, in my personal life. I say fantastic a lot, but it fits. The pretend science of this world mixing with the ideas in real science, the exciting sort of cutting edge sort of things that people are discovering and learning and supposing now are mixed really well. Ryan North has a scientific mind. I mean, clearly, I've had him on the show. I've been reading these books. This man's a genius. Like, he's smarter than anyone needs to be. There's a bunch of artists. I think Carlos Gomez has been fairly consistent on it for a while. It's just so consistently, it's shockingly good. It's exactly what you want a Fantastic Four book to be, in a different way than the Dan Slott's books, which were exactly what you want a Fantastic Four to be. So you do that math. I can't.
Dan Slott's was more superhero-y, Jack Kirby. Yep. This is more super hard science side of the things, which you can do because it's different.
Johnny has a mustache. I don't know if that gives it the edge. I don't know.
I'm getting a little tired of the mustache, to be honest with you.
I don't want to talk about it.
I know you love it.
I don't
You
care
love
that
the
it's there.
mustache. Nightwing ended its run. It's Tom Taylor's run, bringing the book back to relevance, bringing it back to prosperity and popularity. The final issue stuck the landing so hard that Josh picked it over Batman and Robin Year 1, #1, the latest and greatest controversy from Josh's pick of the week's choices.
You're the only one.
It was a great run. Like all long runs, it was a little rocky at times, and some of the stories weren't as good as others. But when it really hit, it sang like no other book on the stands. That was especially true when Bruno Redondo was drawing it, and he came back for the final arc. This, I swear I didn't mean to do this, but the sexy adventures of Dick and Barbara as a couple fighting crime was really fun and fresh and made Nightwing great in a way that hadn't been in years. And at least in our community, everyone was loving it and talking about it all the time. And it is sad to see it go, but I'm glad we had it, and I'm glad it ended so strongly.
I was trying to figure out how to fill this list out. And I'm looking through the books that were the pick of the week. And I'm thinking, and I saw Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, which was, I think it was a 6-issue miniseries out of IDW. This was written and drawn by Patrick Horvath. It was a 6-issue story about a fuzzy animal anthropomorphic world and a female bear who is a serial killer and then finds there's another serial killer and they have a serial killer battle.
Yeah.
And I don't know who Patrick Horvath is. We talked about this on the show. We looked him up. He's, done some short films and things like that. And it was always such a surprise when somebody comes along and seems to have such control of this medium, which should take people years. And I'm like, how do you get this good at it if you haven't published 1,000 books? But, just great artistic sequences and page-by-page storytelling. A story that in most ways, everything was at odds and unexpected with itself. This shouldn't have worked. This should have been really stupid. And it wasn't. It was a beautiful book about ugly things featuring silly looking animals. And there was nothing like that I read this year. Here's the log line. Dexter meets Richard Scarry's Busy Town. I'm like, yeah, I can see that. It totally works, but it's better than that. It's more than just that thing. Beautifully colored. Just I don't know. I don't know where Patrick Horvath came from. It might be the best AI program ever to make comic books, but really interesting, different story out of IDW.
When I found myself filling out this list, I was almost surprised. It's almost subconscious when I typed out The Hunger and The Dusk. I typed it out and I went, I guess so.
Yeah.
We're actually on to book 2 this year, but it's essentially the same thing from G. Willow Wilson, Chris Wildgoose, and IDW again. Chris Wildgoose is one of the best names in comics.
I was thinking it. You said it.
There's no lack of fantasy comics. There are a lot of fantasy comics, and there's a lot of them that aren't good. This one is the best. This one, I think Ron would love. If it passes his test he was talking about earlier in the book series about not wanting to read too many made-up words, not wanting to read too many weird-sounding names. This is more of the Star Wars vein where most everything is going to be familiar. We'll make up a couple words here and there, but mostly we're just going to use our regular language. We'll give people mostly regular names, even though it's set in a fantasy world with orcs and goblins and things. And that's the best way to make it accessible, to make it not hard to penetrate your world, understand the stakes, the alliances, the enemies. When everything is made up, I have a hard time getting into what I should care about. Not the problem here. As humans and orcs have come together to survive because the climate's changing, farming is harder, they're getting driven further south. But there are monsters coming over the hill. There are always monsters coming over the hill. It's a fantasy trope. Mm-hmm. They've got to band together, but they have a hard time because they're natural enemies. It's a very, very good fantasy comic. And we are, 10 issues into the whole thing at this point or close to that. It's great. I'm always excited when it comes out. I'm always happy to see it on the pull list.
Yeah, it's a real example of what execution can do to a genre that is often tried by many, to not make a dent, but they know what they're doing.
G. Will Wilson was an expert. That was it. That was the year, 2024, in films, television, music, podcasts, books, comics, all in the books. Thank you.
A lot of media. A lot of media shoved down our throats.
Didn't even scratch the surface.
Yeah. There was a lot more.
I cut the baseball segment, Ron. We could have talked about
my gosh, yes. It was a good year.
I'm actually wearing a Yankees t-shirt. This is the first time I've worn one since the World Series. Let's do some plugs and talk about what else we got going on. So this is our last show of the year. We're taking our holiday break. We'll be back in January. But if you need things to listen to over the holidays, if you need something to listen to while you wrap presents or while you have guests over, like at a dinner party, and you need some background noise, why not listen to the Mediasplode where we did the year-end mailbag, or the Talksplode with Mitch Gerrits, where Josh talked to him, or the Booksplode that just came out a couple days ago talking about the hidden life of trees. Those are all available for your listening pleasure until we get back. We'll be back January 5th for Pick of the Week 958. That'll be our first show back. Ron, what do you got going on?
As I mentioned on the other Mediasplodes, if you're looking for more podcasts to listen to and you're into mobile technology and phones and tablets and things like that, check out Android Faithful, my other podcast that I do with Jason Howell, Wintwood Dow, and Michelle Rahman. Comes out every Tuesday night. You can get everything over there at androidfaithful.com, as well as all the articles and stuff that we write up covering the world of Android and phones. And then additionally, if you're into pinball, go check out Scorbit, scorbit.io on the web, or you can get the Scorbit app on iOS and Android. It helps you keep track of scores, find places to play pinball, and it's the next step in connected pinball. And we've got a lot of cool stuff coming in 2025, so stay tuned. I'll have a lot more to talk about next year.
What's your favorite machine right now?
Probably Pulp Fiction.
Pulp Fiction?
Yeah, it's a blast.
You can find our library of shows at ifanboy.com, wherever podcasts are sold. Ron, do you know how many shows there are, at least? You have
Thousands.
Nope. Actually,
no.
there isn't.
14 something.
There's 1,400 plus shows at this point.
Gosh.
We passed. They're all there. They're there. You can follow us at iFanboy.
Well, there's 1,400
Comics.
on the feed. There's a couple that are not on the feed. Yeah.
It's a lot of shows.
Counting this one, there's 1,422 shows. Nope, 23 shows.
You said you weren't going to count anymore, but you're counting.
I'm still counting.
I know you
I
are.
got to keep awake.
Follow us at iFanboy Comics on Instagram to find out what the pick of the week is. Sometimes the best of the week in panels. We'll give you little tastes of the shows we got coming out, handcrafted and selected for your teasing enjoyment. You can follow us individually, C.S. Kilpatrick and J. Flanagan on Instagram, and of course our man Ron XO on Instagram, X and Threads. He's posting all the time, right? You're just constantly posting, right?
No, not constantly.
You're a constant
I'm most
poster.
active on Instagram these days. So.
Okay.
Are you on Blue Sky?
I am on Blue Sky, actually.
Are you
Okay.
Ron XO on Blue Sky?
Yeah, Ron XO, Blue Sky. Getting busy over there. It's pretty cool.
Have you ever had to fight for a Ron XO on any of the platforms?
No, I don't fight that much. I think I'm the Ron XO on TikTok, but I don't post on TikTok.
Well, you have an account.
There have been a couple of times I've run into other Ron XOs in the world.
Right.
Yeah. Also, you can head over to youtube.com/iFanboy where you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and you can find all of our old video shows. Plus, we post this very podcast you're listening to every week. So if you prefer to listen to podcasts on YouTube, you could do it there. It's pretty exciting. And a quick reminder, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Pocket Casts, make sure you go into the settings of your app and set iFanboy to auto download. All right. That really helps us out when you do that, but it also helps you out so the podcast is ready to be listened to when you want to. And also, speaking of Pocket Casts, you can now give your favorite podcast a rating on podcasts. Ratings. You need to be subscribed and have downloaded a few episodes before you can rate it. So just take a couple of minutes, give us the rating you think we deserve. Hopefully it's a good one. We appreciate you. Hopefully you appreciate us. We scratch your back, scratch our back.
We wet your beak, you wet our beak.
Exactly. Everybody wins. And finally, there are many, many places on the internet where you can write reviews of podcasts, leave star ratings, Pocket Casts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Take a moment. Tell people what you think of iFanboy. Tell your friends. Go to the comic book store. Tell them, hey, listen to this podcast. I bought you a gift Patreon subscription. Go check it out.
We haven't said in a while. Tell your mom.
Yeah, tell your mom.
Tell your mom. Moms
She's
love
like,
us.
hey, what happened to those guys? And you're like, well, Mom.
Still going. Still going, Mom. Well, that's it, guys. That was super fun. First, thank you guys. I always love doing this with you guys.
Yeah, likewise.
I appreciate you guys, and you're my brothers, and etc. But thank you all out there who listen to every show we do. If you listen to one, thank you. If you listen to them all, thank you. We couldn't do any of this without you. We appreciate you listening to another year. And we'll be back in January 5th. And guys, it'll be our 20th year of doing podcasts.
Oh my gosh.
And our 25th year in general for iFanboy. It's a big year next year.
It's crazy. 20 years of this.
Thanks for listening. We'll look forward to talking to you when we get back. Until then, I'm Connor.
I'm Ron.
Josh is me.
Happy New Year.
See you next year.
Mazel tov.